So it is open.
Yeah, how are you?
And it would never end. I mean, nothing would ever happen. You tune in 80 years later, and we just now went to the kitchen, from the living room to the kitchen. We're still talking.
Yeah. It's always the same, but different. All worked out. Sometimes.
Really? Because that's really important.
Yeah. Well, you know, like you
Right there.
and stuff.
I used to do well. Sitting on the TV, they have a big meeting. This will be just fine.
It's all
One of those gurus who sit front.
Good.
Hey.
Got it. Got it. What are you up to?
Well, I'm supposed to be retired. Hey, Jason, come.
They had to get the experts.
That's right.
I thought I'd better wear clothes at home.
It's out, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's hard to recognize people.
Really good.
Good. Face blind.
And I struggle anyway.
It's almost like you never left.
It'll be weird. Well, I don't think yeah, so far.
Oh, good.
right. Which is what it is.
I just do it on someone.
Hey Tom, how you doing, man? You look like you're in the right state of mind, man.
Yeah.
Right, we made it back. They like swap and roll.
No way. There should be something about that. No power.
Well, I can upgrade her. Yeah, so I mean, essentially what we're gonna do, she's gonna like shit out the screen.
Keeps you busy, keeps you engaged.
Right.
Yeah, good, how are you?
Well, even when she is,
You thinking I'm gonna see you around the neighborhood, but I don't. I'm always dressed different. Shorts, you know.
Okay.
Also, real. She's so.
I saw one back there.
Always a nerd. You're never gonna be powerful there.
but the way this
Yeah, that's
works,
that's on this where
there's no way to really do it. No, but like, all we just need to add is like.
I'm Dan Stuckey, Upper Works, yeah, then communicate. Yeah. Yeah.
I do not know.
That's different.
You have to be better than each other.
She can bring you computers and bring all her stuff.
Pretty well, like high school. Word document.
Rosie's right over here. You want him?
But you can do that in your phone, right?
Yeah.
So what an earthquake. So what an earthquake.
Looks like Rachel's already.
Oh, wait.
Hey, Rob. You're first. Set the bar too high, okay? I follow you. Don't put it out of reach. Nobody wants to. So I'm just saying, don't. Hey, give a presentation.
That's what they call it.
I got to figure out there's 11 So I've got to pick up and then Amanda emailed me yesterday and said, how many reports are there? I had 13. I think something new in there. And I said, 30. I said, same thing. It was 11. I was like, okay, so I just went back on in and said 11. But I've been ignoring the lid because he just was doing
We're about to get started. If everybody can go ahead and take a seat, we're about to get started. We'll start our meeting.
It's quiet over in the jail.
I don't need a microphone. Everybody can hear me? What? Really?
How about now?
That's better.
Hey everybody, Jason Dana, Deputy Emergency Manager, Carson City Fire Department. Thank you very much for being here for our hazard mitigation plan
Recording in
meeting,
progress.
team meeting. You guys are all very important people, that's why you're here. And without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you very much for taking time out of your Friday and being part of this. So real quick, we do have an agenda up here. Not real quick, nothing's gonna be quick, I'm finding out. We have a lot of information to cover, and we've got a real tight time frame deadline to get all this stuff done. So every 5 years, we need to update the hazard mitigation plan. Last time was done in 2016. So we're updating this for 21. It's due August 4th. So the first question, why, Jason, you guys wait until the very last minute to get this done? Well, we started this about 2 years ago. 2 years ago from the very beginning, and COVID and one thing after another, mostly COVID and release of funds. We are here today, so we made a real tight time frame when we went out to bid with our contractors. R.O. Anderson was the contractor that did it last time. We went out to a competitive bid and ended up with R.O. Anderson again, which we're very thankful for, and I'll introduce you to them in a second. So we'll go to the next one. So you got who I am. So thank you very much for everybody being here. For the most part, there's all the department heads and our LEPC members. So we have Local Emergency Planning Committee for Carson City. So we have representatives from the fire department, from the sheriff's office, from the health department, from IT, from Public Works, bunch of other ones. Water, our elected officials, school district, thank you very much. I don't know who everybody is, but now I do. I know your last name. I know the people on the pictures on the Zoom meetings and so forth. So anyways, that's who we are. Plus we invited several other additional planning team members, members of the public. We have a handful of people on the Zoom meeting, I believe. And we have Elizabeth Ashby behind me that's going to remind me all the stuff that I'm missing, which is fantastic. And Kate Cunningham from R.O. Anderson. In the back, we have a sign-in sheet. It's imperative that you get signed in on a sign-in sheet. We got to keep track of who's here and hours and that kind of stuff. So if you haven't signed in, please sign in. Yep. So what's the purpose of the hazard mitigation plan? Obviously to save lives and protect property. Growing up in the fire business for a long time, that was all reactive. This is all proactive. So this is kind of neat and interesting and new for me, and that's what we're working on now. So how we do this is getting funding, right? So funding, preparing, recognizing what our issues are, where we can improve, where we can get better, and methods of funding. So that's where we're going to identify what our issues are, what our concerns are, and where we need to improve, and that's going to help us with the funding. So this is very, very imperative that we have community engagement and community involvement. And obviously we're getting that right now with a lot of the faces I'm seeing right now. But what that does is cultivates the hazard and mitigation awareness, and it brings light for things to us that we don't think about necessarily, and we can put in a plan. And FEMA requires this. So back to our tight time frame. This kind of spells out our meeting schedule, our planning schedule. I was asked why we do this on a Friday in the afternoon, and I don't have a good answer except there's no other days. So we got a tight time frame we're going to work on. So with that being said, if you guys have stuff, inputs, questions, reports that we're asking for, get that stuff to us as fast as you can, and we'll get that stuff in there. So again, expiration is August 4th. So again, we need your help, and we can't do this alone. So in the hazard mitigation plan, all our different disciplines, it's all going to be broken down so we can focus on those areas. As we reach out to invite your input, please respond when you can. The draft reviews are going to be distributed to the planning team. You guys are the planning team. Please respond at your earliest opportunity. We volunteers to assist with specific tasks at the end of the meeting, and may follow up with additional requests as the process unfolds. And of course, your comments, questions, suggestions are welcome through the planning process. Please reach out to the R.O. Anderson team and through myself, and I'll get those answers, and I'll try to the best I can. This is what I thought I could do for my plan. Tom Raw told me this was going to be the plan that I was going to come up with. This is what I started with. Stephanie told me no. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. This is Elizabeth Ashby, and I am with R.O. Anderson, and we are supporting your efforts in building your plan. This hazard mitigation plan is a community plan, and it's not FEMA's plan. It's obviously something that you create, you develop with your information. We're just here kind of coordinate and help along, make sure the requirements are met. So keep that in mind while we're working. It is Carson City's hazard mitigation plan. Okay, next. Thank you. Okay, so I put down the requirement here to update every 5 years. Take it as 4 years. The 5th year, you're going to be so busy, you're not going to have time to think about it. So when you plan, when you do the mitigation actions, let's shoot for 4 years rather than 5. Okay. All right. So the planning process has several requirements. They're called elements. There are 5 elements, and you will see later in the presentation those 5 elements have many, many questions after them. So it's not just a simple, what was the plumbing process? There are other questions and requirements that follow that element. Next slide, please. How many of you have been through this process before? Yes, we have a few victims then to bring you on board. So, hazard mitigation, this is what hazard mitigation is, as defined by FEMA. What I wanted to bring to your attention more than anything else is the purple circle. That means that mitigation can take place throughout the entire emergency management process. It's not static. You can do mitigation actions in recovery or in preparedness cycle of emergency management. Next slide, please. Benefits, all this funding is beneficial if you have a plan, and it requires a plan in order for you to be eligible, for you, Carson City, to be eligible for this funding. I think the most important one for me is this category C through G of public assistance. If there is a disaster and you don't have a hazard mitigation plan, that repair and reconstruction does not happen with FEMA funds. Okay, you're not eligible for those. So to me, that's one of the most important parts of why you need a hazard mitigation plan. Thank you. These are examples of projects, but I want to hear what you think. What is it that you want to do in your hazard mitigation plan? And that's why we're here, to talk about your thoughts and your experiences in the last 5 years on what has happened in Carson City, and update whatever is currently in the whole plan and bring it up to date. Next slide, please. Okay. I think what I like about this is the clearness of the natural hazard mitigation saves $6 an average for every $1 spent. That's the 2018 study. In 2005, the first study they did, they said $4 for every $1 spent on hazard mitigation. I don't know how they got the numbers, but it looks really good. Right? And I think it does happen, that you do save money, you do have a return on investment if you spend money on mitigation throughout all of your hazards. Thank you. Okay, so what are the steps to update the plan? I think one of the most important ones is this one, which Rachel is helping us tremendously with. The public outreach and input is very important in the FEMA requirements. So we need to document. But the other steps are just as important because they're required as well. So we're going to start off with this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, right? We can do this. We can do this in 2 months. Okay, next step. Okay, so the community profile. We're already building this community profile. It should be ready for your review early next week. We'll send it out to everybody, ask for input and feedback, and revise accordingly, and then it'll be up for approval by you, the planning team. So we're moving along. So these are the contents of your community profile. Again, we have drafts. We have something that we've gathered, but if you see something we missed in the draft, please make sure that we get the information so we can include it. Okay? Next slide, please. The hazard profile, that's part of why we're here today. We're going to talk about hazards. So the gist of the hazard mitigation plan requirements is that it is a natural hazard-based plan. But because it's a community plan, you get to choose which hazards you want. So if you want man-made hazards, we can include man-made hazards. And we do have, in the 2016 version, we have several man-made hazards. So we'll put it out for vote if you guys want to continue with those man-made hazards. Okay, and these notes are just what will be included for each one of those hazards that we find and promote. We'll include all of this information in those profiles. Okay, next slide. Oh, the risk assessment. This is kind of like the heart of the hazard mitigation plan, your assets and your hazards, where do they overlay? Can you go to the next slide, thank you. And that overlay is your risk assessment, okay? So we'll come up with some numbers and some maps for you to look at, and at the next meeting, and then we'll be looking at what kind of strategies, what kind of action items we can build based on that risk, okay? This integration piece is, it's a little cumbersome, but we find that you guys have plans, a lot of plans already, and the gist of the integration is not to duplicate, but find what is missing. So if you already have codes for not building on the floodplain, that's very good. We're not going to put it into the hazard mitigation plan because you've already got it in your master plan or zoning plan. But we can find something else that we can do for flooding, right? I'm sure there are projects out there that we can do for flooding. We just want to avoid the duplication and make sure we find activities that are appropriate for the 4 years, right? 4 years that this plan is going to be in effect. And those action items, we're probably going to be talking with those subject matter experts and everybody else to find out what kind of activities you feel will be feasible during those 4 years. Because part of the update process is to look back at what we did. And so we want to make sure that those activities and goals that we provide in the update are, again, feasible during the next 4 years. Okay, next slide, please. Did I miss anything? No? Okay, this is the last part, the FEMA plan review tool. This is what needs to be completed before we send it off to FEMA. And so remember when we're talking about the element planning process? So we got to answer all these questions. These are all requirements under that element. So when we ask for questions, believe me, it's part of a requirement. We're not making it up, okay? Just so you know. All right, so this is for the planning process, and this is for the evaluation. So you can see each of those elements at least have 2 other requirements that we need to respond to. So again, if we're asking for information, it's because we need to meet that requirement. Okay? Any questions for me? Wonderful. So that's what we're doing in about 8 weeks. Okay? Great. Thank you. Kate? Kate is going to talk a little bit about our communication and, Charlie? No, never mind.
Is that what I think I am?
Okay.
All right. First I want to say thank you all for being here. So thrilled to meet you in person. And thank you people that are coming in online. We appreciate your participation. I just want to let you know that as we are asking you for information, it will become, I'm basically the conduit, so please send it primarily through me. If you have an integration document, a plan from your arena that we don't have, and it's too large to send via email, I'll coordinate with you and send you a place to drop it. When we send out a request for you to review something, it will include a place to send it back to electronically. Not that you can send it through email or you can send it to a Dropbox. So we'll do it kind of both ways, depending on the task at hand. So as she mentioned, we'll be using email and maybe ShareFile for some of these things, and when it comes to drafts for review, approval requests, or even asking for a one-on-one meeting, these are the ways that we'll communicate. Next slide. I think it's,
Oh, it's just the end.
oh,
That's what we want. That's what we want, the hazard mitigation plan update.
all right.
Next.
And then the next one. So we can see you have received a few pictures of flood events, some fire events. If you happen to have a picture taken in the last 5 years illustrating the impacts of a hazard, we invite you to send them our way. So we'd appreciate hearing from you on that. And the next one. And this is just a preview of where we are now. Our next section is an overview of our outreach from Rachel, and then we'll have Hope Sullivan talk about future growth, and then we'll bring up our subject matter experts. All right, thanks everybody.
So if anybody didn't recognize that picture, that was from the floods of 17 Greenhouse Garden Center coming down towards Curry Street. That was our inmate Bruce sandbag.
So that's a piece of information, very much like the path, when you send the pictures, when it happened, and the location. If you can include that with the pictures, we sure appreciate it. Okay, hello, my name is Rachel Schneider. I'm the digital media coordinator for City of Carson City. Carson City is dedicated to strengthening its relationships with its constituents through transparent, open communications. And a lot of what I do is enabling that. Right now we are streaming live on YouTube, and we are also participating in a Zoom meeting. And that allows both virtual and in-person participation throughout this workshop. Thanks to me. And George.
Thank you.
Although some departments offer their own public information materials and services, the majority of the public information activities are being conducted through the city manager's office, by myself, I often provide information, photos, videos, sound bites to our media representatives. I also produce this on our social media platforms. We have 15 Facebook pages, oh man, over 30 YouTube pages, 5 Twitter accounts, and 1 Pinterest. Nextdoor, we're on Nextdoor. Carson City Sheriff is on Neighbors for Ring, and so is the fire department. The city's understanding and use of dynamic communication tools and cooperation with the reporters and editors is essential to accurate, timely, and useful information for the readers, listeners, and viewers. It's really important to have a really positive relationship with the press. When I need something out immediately and I need a diverse range of people to get that information, my first thing is to go to the press. The success of our outreach activities depends on the development and use of a more forward-thinking, strategic, and proactive approach for public information. During the 2017 floods, we had a live status map feature, which we would ping certain incident points where Public Works was either actively engaged in or they were on their way to correct the current flooding issue. I work for all departments. It's not one department. Every department has a department head who is my boss too. So I report to all the departments. If they need something, I find ways to get it to them no matter what. If we don't have the equipment, I find ways to get the equipment, either borrowing it from other agencies or possibly putting it on future financial expenses. And I also establish a multiple distribution list for specific events and emergencies so that we can have targeted communications, which equals a greater correspondence. For example, Nevada Day, I have an entire Nevada Day distribution list for all the activities and the planning and coordination. I also maintain the campaign Carson Proud, which is a public works campaign for capital projects. Dan Stuckey. I work with him all the time on it. We provide email distribution lists, email newsletters, and also text notifications. For every time the website is updated, constituents who have subscribed to the text notifications will get a text message sent directly to their mobile device. My
my responsibility is also to work with the deputy emergency manager, and this is why I helped coordinate today's event. After today, I would
It is in Carson City.
that's the structured fire training we had 2 years ago. After today, I would appreciate if members of the public watching fill out a survey. The survey is in response to the hazard plan. It will be able to help us measure how you feel about specific incidents that may impact you personally or impacted you in some other ways. Please let us know. The hazard mitigation survey is located on our website at carson.org/hazard plan. So I'm going to repeat that, carson.org/hazard plan. So this is what I'm really excited to talk about. I've been working with our Undersheriff Jerome Tushbont for a few months on this. Carson City Sheriff is about to implement a sheriff's app, which enables immediate information sent to people who install the app on their mobile device. We'll do e-notifications. They'll get push notifications whenever there's a major alert. It's also going to open access to inmate information, what's going on in your neighborhood, and then you can also submit a tip. So the submit a tip option on the app is going to be the biggest feature for the app alone, because I'm sure a lot of people will be able to use that more frequently. Okay, so my information distribution process is this. First, I'll go straight to the press. Often I'll ask what they need. If they want video, I'll get the video. If they just need the press release and the photo, I'll make sure they get that. Then I'll update the city website, and then I'll be able to send text message eventually. We're working on that right now. E-notifications is an option if you're subscribed to them. Social media, obviously, that's the go-to. And the best thing for me that I've experienced, and a lot of people don't anticipate it much, is word of mouth. Word of mouth really works out for me. Carson City still has that hometown feel. And we have a lot of, everybody knows everybody in Carson City. I can't tell you how many times I've gone grocery shopping and I haven't run into a coworker or a friend or a family member. So word of mouth is very beneficial. And that's why I would always say use a user-friendly URL. Something they can say, something they can tell their neighbor. Oh yeah, you can complete the survey at carson.org/hazard plan. We also have the option to insert flyers in the utility bills, so we can reach all our customers that way. And we'll also use posters posted up at all the business locations. Currently we have the mask campaign posters in all the businesses. You'll see the blue one with the girl with the pink mask. I designed that. And then there's the red, black, and white one. So our city site will reach on a range of 40,000 to 70,000 visitors per month. Our social media has the potential to reach 200,000 people. I've done it before, I've seen it happen, and it's truly amazing when it does. Because the problem with Facebook is you're beholden to an algorithm. And the algorithm decides whether or not people see it or not. Text and e-notice subscriptions are becoming very popular. That's the future. If you don't have a way, if you're running a business, if you're doing something, and you don't have a way to offer a text subscription option or an e-notice subscription option, it's going to be really hard to market yourself. That's about it. I'm done. Any questions?
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, I'll pull it for you.
Okay, Rachel, so far, that's all. a second for the slides to come up.
Oh, did you email it to me?
I sent it.
It's in our flash drive.
Okay. Got it.
It's number 2 in the queue.
Perfect, we can go next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so before giving an overview on the specifics of development in Carson City, I want to talk about policy and process. This is actually a master plan slide, and what the master plan tells us from a policy perspective is Carson City has compact development surrounded by a green belt. So you see that green on the perimeter, which is basically the green belt. So as we go through the actual development projects, you're going to see a lot of info, and I thought that was important to talk about when we talk about hazard mitigation. I also want to talk about process just really briefly. Procedurally, we have a development team, and I'm going to call out some of the members of our development team and talk about some of the things they look at, which are hazard related. So key team members regarding hazard mitigation is Dave Rubin, our fire marshal. Every single proposed project we get, Dave's looking at it in terms of the wildfire interface zone. He's looking at defensible space, because we know the fire code ignores property lines. He's looking at how the fire department's going to stage for a fire. And given how they're going to stage for a fire, how are the residents going to be able to get out of that development? So these are things being implemented. Stephen Pote with our development engineering, also along with fire, is looking at access issues. And our board's been very committed to 2 points of access, even when we get pretty strong pushes to not go there. But they recognize that should there be an emergency, there needs to be that secondary access. Rob Fellows, who's one of our subject experts, sits with the development team a lot. He's our floodplain manager. So he's looking at things like restricting development in our floodways, and he's looking at the floodplain to ensure community safety. And not just how a channel's constructed and looking at the sizing of a channel, but also considering the maintenance of the channel. Who has that maintenance responsibility? How does it work if we really have an event and we need to get reimbursement? We'll often have people saying, oh, well, the HOA will do it. Well, how will that work with a FEMA reimbursement? So this is all being implemented in development review. And Destin Booth with our health department sits with the development team. And he'll look at things, for example, vector control. And maybe you have a swampy area where the city's been spraying for mosquitoes. And now we're about to get development there. But we don't want to forfeit our ability to do the vector control. So we work with developers and try to figure out how to address that so that we're constantly looking out for these type of situations. This presentation will focus on residential development. However, we do have non-residential development. The hospital's expanding. We're seeing more commercial development in the southwest part of the city, and we're seeing a lot of industrial development in the eastern part of the city. But again, it's primarily infill development. So in terms of residential development, this calendar year, we've had 50 housing starts for single family, 8 housing starts for multifamily. Well, I'm going to talk now, where are the houses getting built? I'm sure you drive around town, you see houses being built everywhere. Well, the dots on this map sort of show you they are being built everywhere. From the very southern part where we have Shoals Ranch to the very northern area where we have Silver Oak. Arbor Villas is on Little Lane, kind of behind the post office on Route. That's well under construction with townhouses. Jackson Village is behind J.C. Penney on Eagle, Eagle Station. And if you've gone there, Don Smith's the developer, he'll call it Whoville. If you haven't been there, drive through. It has some cool colors in there. Those are single family detached. Little Lane Village is next door to Arbor Villas, and they're starting to get their first houses up. And so that area was really interesting because there are 3 parcels there that were owned by the Anderson family and sold relatively recently, and they're all moving. Mills Landing is across from Mills Park, next to State Street. That's Mark Turner's townhouses. I saw a big crane out there yesterday, so well underway. Schultz Ranch Phase 1 through 4, so 416 lots. Those are down Topsy, and they're pretty well done on 1 through 3, still going on 4, but Lennar's staying steady down there. Silver Oak's staying steady. If anybody drives through Silver Oak, they're still building. Phases 21 through 23, if you can go to the next slide, 23B. They're still building houses in there. Carson Hills Apartments is behind the Fandango and Galaxy Theater, 360 units, and they are probably about, I'm going to say 3/4 through, but they're still building. Blanca West Apartments, they're doing the grading work, but they'll go right into building permit. That's right at the corner of Salomon and 5th. So those apartments will be coming in 360 units. The site work's underway. Okay, so where are we doing construction in anticipation of building houses? That means the site work's either they have applications in to do their site work, or they're actually doing the site work. So they're going horizontal, they haven't gone vertical yet. Oh, can we go back to one sec, sorry. Again, all over the city, but it's still infill. So everything I've identified so far is infill. And so obviously down, we're gonna have another phase of Schultz Ranch that's under construction, but it's a horizontal right now, all the way up to Silver Oak with more phases coming on board. Anderson Ranch, that's on the west side between Mountain and Ormsby. They're in for their site development permit, and then Lennar purchased this property, so this is going to be built in the next couple of years. Blackstone Ranch Phase 1 and Phase 2, Ryder Homes has purchased those properties. The site work's being done. The final map's really probably going to be recorded in the next 30 days. On Phase 1 and Phase 2 construction, horizontal construction's underway as well. Clearview Ridge is in the southwest corner of the city, so a lot of people will say to me, what's going on behind, I can't think of the commercial building there.
Save Martin.
No, it's Save Mart, so I'll say, what's going on behind Save Mart? And I always forget about Clearview Ridge, because it's been around for a really long time, but it is under construction. Emerson Cottages, this is in the northern area, so if you travel north on Route, and then you cross College and Route turns into Emerson, on that right side, right before the overpass, that property is being developed with this subdivision. The Mylar's in, it's getting its signatures, and it will probably go to the board later this month. Schultz Ranch Phase 5, again, we talked about Phase 1 through 4 has houses. Phase 5 has a final map. They're doing their horizontal work, and they'll go vertical as soon as they're good to go. Silvercrest Condominiums. This is an Oak and Roland, so there's a church there right now and a house, so this would get redeveloped. So this is that area. There's a fire station over there on Schneider, I believe it is. So over in that sort of corner, we're seeing redevelopment in that area of the city. Silver Oak Townhomes is on Clearview and Silver Sage, so Lisa's neck of the woods, across the street. So this is, you go where the commercial area is on Carson. On Clearview, you travel easterly, and this lot it's right there by, I think it's Southwest Gas is out that way. Another Silver Oak phase, they just keep coming in. Brown Street Apartments, this is kind of behind Slot World. So Dwight Millard's got this project going on, and I think it hasn't gotten under construction yet because of the stormwater, maybe not. I think that's right, Beth.
Yeah, they're real close.
Yeah, they're very, very close. He's got all his permits in, and this will be another apartment complex. But again, I just have to keep saying it's all infill. Okay, other residential activity that I just want to mention. Little Land Lane Apartments, I told you the Anderson family sold the 3 properties on Lil Lane. Lil Lane Apartments was recently purchased. They just went through the planning commission for their entitlement for 140 units. It had been 126 or something. And I feel confident we'll see building permits on this very soon. Stewart Street Apartments, this is the old lumber yard that's by the mall. This land was purchased by a group out of Texas. They have their entitlements, and I also anticipate that this will go under construction. So I just wanted to mention those 2 pretty big apartment complexes right near the core of the city. So that's just a really quick overview of things I think we're going to see constructed when we sit here in 4 years, 5 years. These will be new residents living on these properties. Thank you.
All right, good.
Yeah. That's some of the stuff that was not
Here we go. All right, thanks everybody. I'm Rob Fellows. I'm the floodplain manager for Carson City. Got to get in the picture. I put a few things together. Some of it we may not go through, but we'll get the majority of it up there. A lot of good things have happened in Carson City over the years. I know the freeway was a big game changer for us. It provided essentially a backbone system that provided over the 100-year flood protection for the city, and we've been branching off ever since. So I've been working for Carson City for 20 years, and of those 20 years, I've been the floodplain manager for probably 15 or 16. I experienced the 2005 flood, and you know we actually had 3 disasters together in that. We had a fire in 2004, and then we had a snow disaster, and then we had a flood. So in the span of just a few years, we had quite a few things. Oh, here we are. So we'll just go back to the first one just real quick, because I want to talk about this picture. So this is a picture of a basin that we have on the west side over by the college. This is VC Basin. It's a total retention basin, and it was done as a part of the waterfall fire to prevent or protect from debris that usually happens after a fire. And in 2017, this is from 2017, it did its job, and it contained all of the flow that came off of that watershed. So, thanks. I wanted to show you a few of the maps. We've been very active remapping and restudying Carson City. Over the years, a lot of the maps prior to the last 10 years were done in the 80s, in the 90s, and so there was quite a difference in time frame between what the maps were showing in reality. And so this is the current map. This is the north half. I kind of divided things up into sections. So this is the north half. The freeway is up here. Over there you see different areas that have a blue line around them. Those are recent LOMARs. So those are map changes that just happened in the last few years. The Gonai watershed, where the airport is, and then further to the east, that's over by the golf course. Next. So this is kind of the center of town. On this side we have Kings Canyon and Ash Canyon. So those are very large watersheds that flow through the city. And then on the other side, this area over here, this is currently where the Wampa Ranch subdivision is. They've done some mitigation over there. I'm sure you've seen those big channels along 5th Street. So those are mitigation for that floodplain. And they also have raised up the property The current code for floodplain protection in Carson City is 2 feet of freeboard between the lowest floor and the flood elevation. A lot of people deal with like 1 foot, or actually some of them are still at, that's the very minimum. If you're just at the BFE with your lowest floor, that's the minimum requirement. Carson City is 2 feet, 2 feet above. This is showing the lower part of the city. This is Clear Creek here, and then the Carson River, and kind of in between is where the prison farm is. So we're actively actually doing two more restudies. One is a restudy of the Solomon area. That's by kind of the mid part of the city, and we just have kicked off a restudy of the Clear Creek watershed. So a lot of things are happening in Carson City. Next. So I went through, because we talked about frequency, so I went through and I picked out some storm events and things that happened in Carson City. And you can see all the way from 1861 to present, these are the various storms and flood events in Carson City. There was a few other ones that I didn't include, but you can see a lot of them happen in the winter and a lot of them happen in the summer. When you go to the next slide, and you look at the time between the storms, from here to here, 1 year, 11 years, 20 years, there's a few gaps, but if you add all that up and then kind of get the average, it appears that something's going to happen about every 7.5 years, 7.5 to 10 years. All of the storm, I guess what they produce, the amount of rainfall and things are going to be different. For instance, in 1997, the Carson River was about a 100-year flood on the Carson River. But in Carson City, the water coming out of Eagle Valley was about a 25-year event. So they don't always add up to the same event. You can have different events in different parts of the city. For instance, when we had the flash floods in 2014, we had like a 200-year event over Prison Hill, but the rest of the city was dry. And that event didn't even show up on the stream gauge going out of the valley. So it all depends. You're not going to have the same thing happening all over the city at the same time. Next. So in 2017, here's kind of a map showing the various areas where we had damage, and it shows up all over the city. So that was a rain on snow event. So we had that happened in January, and then we turned around and happened again in February. And actually, we're still working on getting some of those repairs done. So, a couple of pictures. This is of the same area. This is Road Street. So this is when we started sandbagging. For some reason, that was a big deal. It hasn't been like that in the past, but in this case, it was. Next. We had an issue up towards Lakeview where the water had started washing out the edge of the road and exposed the high pressure gas line. And so we were up there quickly sandbagging and backfilling behind here to make sure that gas line didn't get damaged. Next. This is a sediment basin off of Coombs Canyon. And so surprisingly, we have a lot of facilities out there to take care of things. So this did its job. It captured the sediment that was coming out of Coombs Canyon near Silver Oak Golf Course. Next. And of course, in the center of town, we had some issues and some damage, not as much, but still, Mills Park was flooded as part of the floodplain. So we had water in Mills Park. In 2014, this is a picture of the flash flood out of Prison Hill that came down. I think this is Coombs. Anyway, it wasn't supposed to go like right over the freeway, but it did. So anyway, we did some mitigation, and hopefully that won't happen again. This is a water quality basin down by the freeway, and you often ask yourself, I'm sure, does that thing ever get water? Well, it's pretty full, so it can get water. So what we've been working on 2017 is obviously we got the Lump Ranch Channel. That's a great benefit to them and the city. And we're working on drainage plans for the North Carson City area. And we've got a couple of grants that we put in for basins on the north side as mitigation. We're also working on an area plan for the west side, dealing with Ash Canyon and Kings Canyon. Next. So in the past, after the 2005 flood, we did some things, some mitigation. We actually expanded and built VC Retention Basin, the freeway, put in Voltaire Basin down at the south end of town. We put in some basins in the Quill Meadow on the west side. There was a lot of improvements with the freeway. And on the very east side, we actually improved the drainage on Sierra View Road. If you're heading out to the east side and you turn south, that's a brand new road with new drainage facilities. Let's see, this next one. Oh, 1997. So as you can see, a lot of action happens after a disaster. A lot of things get done. So after the 1997 flood, they actually did some work on BC Canyon as well, but they didn't build a big basin. They came together with, this is before the freeway, so they came together and said, hey, can we do more with when the freeway comes? Can we do other things related to drainage after experiencing that flood? And they made a plan. It's called the Northwest Drainage Project, and it included, obviously, the freeway drainage, but it included quite a few basins in the northwest part of town, which are built now. Just a couple more things in there. There's a lot of flooding on East 50. That was always an issue, and that was included in the design as well. So I don't know if I'm supposed to go over these. These are some goals that are in the current plan, but I know that, yes, do it, or go for it. So obviously, there's like, I think there's like eight or nine policies. One of them is that we discourage growth in flood-prone areas. And Carson City has done very well with that. There's only a few private properties that would be nice to be owned, actually. But to keep the zoning like agriculture or not high density. So that's very important to keep structures out of the floodplain. Right now we have like 70% of the high zone flood risk property is in open space. We just ran the numbers, and that's a big deal. Most of it's down by the river. Obviously, we want to work with adjacent counties and support a regional flood approach. We do have a regional plan that we've adopted and updated, and so that's ongoing and that's done. To update and expand the sandbagging plan, we do have a sandbagging plan for the entire city. It does need to be updated, but that can be done soon. We have a goal here to install new flood facilities and update the storm drain system. We're always doing that. Next. This was a big one years ago, is through an exchange, the lands bill, there was actually property being exchanged between BLM and the city and the Forest Service and Washoe Tribe and so forth. I know there's another update on that soon where we're going to get additional land for BLM, and those lands we've targeted for additional basins, storm drain basins, so that's very important. It's going to need to be changed though. And then here, develop a plan for the new Empire area for flood control. We're working on that. And obviously the Gonan Canyon area is to work on the flood control in that area. So there may be some other ones we want to slip in, but overall the best mitigation is really to capture the water before it comes into town. It's not going to always work because you're going to have some flash floods, but at least if we're not getting floods from the mountains, I think we'll just have to work on the inside of the city later on. That's all I have.
I guess we have to wait, huh? It was a thumbnail. Yep. Sorry, I gotta be difficult. Put Rachel on the spot.
I'm used to it.
Good under pressure. Well, good afternoon, everybody. While Rachel's doing that, I guess I can do my own introduction. My name is Rod Rummel. I am the Wildland Fuels Management Officer for Carson City Fire Department. What that big, long title means is I deal with all the vegetation in the city as it applies to fire and wildland fire in particular. You can go ahead to the next one. So for the wildland fire hazard portion of the HMP, I wanted to take a look at a couple different things. And so we're going to talk about what is the wildfire history within Carson City. You know, what can we learn from the past that's going to tell us that what might happen in the future? What factors influence wildland fire? And what fire looks like in Carson City. So on this map, it'll show you all these different colors are different wildfires that have happened around the area. So middle of Carson City is right here. So we basically, if you look around the hills, any hill you see around Carson City, you're looking at an old fire scar. So there was fire on that hill at one point or another in our history. So that tells us that throughout the entire, or around the entire city, we're vulnerable to wildland fire. Especially on our west side. I mean, the west side of Carson City, there's all these different colors are just fires on top of fires on top of fires throughout the years. So this is what we call the wildland fire behavior triangle. There's 3 different factors that influence wildland fire behavior. Weather, you know, it's hot and dry in the summertime. We all know throughout the summer, we go long periods of time without rain. And so what that does is it dries out our natural vegetation and makes it very prone to ignition. And then once we have an ignition, to propagating that fire throughout our landscapes. The second part of the triangle is topography. So where on the hill the fire starts and which way that hill is facing. If it's facing south, it gets pounded with sun all day long. So you're going to have a fire that moves quicker through that vegetation. The third part of the triangle is fuel. What actually is out on the landscape that's going to burn? So out of those 3 factors, the only one we can change is fuels. We can't change the steepness of the hills. We can't change the weather that we have, the weather patterns. So the only way we can mitigate wildfire risk is by augmenting and manipulating our fuels throughout the city and those lands adjacent to our city. So how do we manipulate fuels? So here's a picture. This is up by Lakeview. This actually burned in the waterfall fire, and these were trees planted after the waterfall fire in 2004. As you can see, the brush has grown up underneath these trees. We've already had a crew go through and limb up the bottom of those trees. And then, go ahead. So this is after fuels treatment. We were trying to mimic Mother Nature. We're trying to mimic what happened out in nature by reintroducing the effects of fire. So if a fire went through this area, it would take out a lot of this brush. So instead we can do that mechanically around our at-risk communities. So we're manipulating those fuels to reduce fire behavior around our at-risk communities. Here's another picture of before, and this is after. So basically we're removing the fuels. There's a house right over here to the right-hand side, but we're reducing those fuels as we come into the structure environment. If we're going to learn from our past, right? So the major wildfire that we've seen here in Carson was the waterfall fire of 2004. We lost 18 structures, 50-something vehicles, a couple outbuildings, devastating to the west side of Carson City. This is the community of Timberline. You can see it went completely all the way around. This is Timberline Drive right here that goes up and around. That area looks completely different today. There you can see all the dead trees up on the landscape. Those are all gone. Now it's all brush. So it's reverted back to a brush vegetation type now. More of the Timberline area. This is kind of around the canyon a little bit. The fire burned so hot up in the Timberline area that it burned down to bare mineral soil. So what happens, we'll build on Rob's talk from before, now that soil doesn't absorb water anymore. So then all of it turns into runoff. So we start to see flood events after wildland fire events. You know, this is what we don't want to happen. So what happens, what are the losses to the community when we do see a wildland fire? People are displaced. Property damage. Rebuilding process takes years usually. We get a loss of water quality because now instead of that water infiltrating the soil and making its way through soil to natural basins, it hits the top of the soil and runs off. And it takes sediment and debris and stuff with it. So we see those debris flows, the sedimentation of creeks. So the environmental damage after a wildland fire is often overlooked. You know, we look at, oh look, the houses are rebuilt, everybody's doing well. When the environment that's left behind after a wildland fire takes years and years and years to recuperate. Oh, sorry. The economic impacts, you know, we lose tax base, we lose, decreased property values for those years after the wildland fire. I'm sure those properties up in Timberline weren't worth what they were before. So people trying to get in and out of the area, it affects a lot of different stuff. And then the last thing, the environmental damage. So if we're going to learn from our history, in the last 5 years of this hazard mitigation plan, we've seen very little wildland fire here in Carson City. And then if we actually go back 10 years, we've seen very little. But then the 5 years before that, we saw a huge increase. We haven't seen wildland fire on a large scale in Carson City in a good 5 or 6 years. So we're due. It's going to happen. We can't do anything about that. Because what we can do is modify the fuels, and that's what the fuels division of the fire department is really concentrating on. And we've got a lot of support from the city and the fire department in general. And that's all I got.
All right.
did his homework, so we don't need to help him again. But Rod and some of the other people that I sent will be touching base with them to make sure we go over those mitigation actions that were, okay, so Chris, maybe you want to come and make sure we know what their status is. And also, if they're not done, do we want to continue or are they not relevant anymore? Because things change throughout the city. And so that's something that we will coordinate one-on-one meetings with each one of you to talk to discuss and figure out what the status of those actions are. Okay, I think we're having technical difficulties with.
Oh.
There we go.
We can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Okay, is that my screen? Yeah, okay, good, thank you, thanks. Hi, everybody. Well, I'm not sure why this isn't going into the mode here. But anyway, let me just go ahead. Anyway, so I haven't done a lot of work in the since about 2015 in Carson City, except to make one observation, which is that Carson City actually has the highest hazard of any city in the Basin and Range province. So I knew Carson City had a high earthquake hazard, but I never compared it to other places such as Salt Lake City or Reno or any place else. It actually has the highest hazard in the Basin and Range province, which is, anyway. That's why it's so pretty there. That's why you have these beautiful mountains. So, what would you expect in a city that had the highest earthquake hazard in the province? Well, you'd probably expect it to have experienced damaging earthquakes. You'd expect a high level of background earthquakes, perhaps. You'd expect a whole lot of faults that could create earthquakes. And you'd expect high rates of earthquake activity and short times between paleo earthquakes if you dig into the faults. And we have all of those things present in Carson City. This is a list of the historic earthquakes that have occurred. And over on the right-hand side, CCMMI, that's the modified Mercalli intensity in Carson City from these earthquakes. So modified Mercalli intensity, that's a measure we use to describe the effects of an earthquake. And in particular, we put them in Roman numerals so they can be kept separate from magnitudes. And we've got some there, there's 6. With intensity 6, we have shaking that's strong enough to, say, get some cracks in a house. It rocks the house back and forth. But not a lot of other damage. People will panic a little bit during that 6. That's when people start to get pretty scared. At intensity 7, things that can topple, such as the chimney, begin to have failures of those. And intensity 8, the weaker buildings, such as unreinforced masonry buildings or those kind of things, will begin to have damage. And so we can see we have a whole lot of earthquakes from 1857, 1860, 1868, and so on, some back-to-back years there. All the way through the earthquakes that occurred in central Nevada that actually did had some strong effects in Carson City. So there have been a lot of earthquakes that have struck Carson City, and in particular, the 1887 is one of the strongest. It's one of the most damaging earthquakes in Nevada's history. So it was June 3rd, 1887. There were no foreshocks. It was an early morning earthquake, 2:40 a.m. We sure have a lot of those that occur at nighttime. The most recent one, the 2020 Monte Cristo Range earthquake, for example, occurred at 4:03 in the morning. And we had highway damage, and a car actually hit that and blew out some tires because they didn't quite know
that there was some damage there and they were going at high speed. So kind of something to keep in mind. Keep your bedroom areas clear so you can weather an earthquake there. This earthquake was difficult to stand. People fled to the streets, as they always seem to do. General hysteria. All the stone and brick buildings in town showed the effects of the earthquake. There were cracked walls, there were walls that were separated from the front of the building by inches. You could see right into the building. Chimneys that were damaged, fallen plaster, windows, all kinds of things like that. It was a major, major earthquake for Carson City. Genoa was badly damaged as well, and there were some effects in Glenbrook as well. There was a phenomenon known as liquefaction that occurred. So if you have young, unconsolidated sediments, and they're saturated with water, and you start shaking them, they can act actually like a liquid for a short period of time. And they can flow. And so if you have a road that's constructed across an area and liquefies, the road may flow out and get a number of cracks in it and that kind of thing. And that happened on the road going to the prison across the Eagle Valley. There were some other landslides, rock falls in the mountains, and there was one earthquake-related fire where a hotel and mound house had some chimney damage, but didn't realize it, and they started a fire that night. And, burned the hotel down before the folks from Carson City could get out there. So here's historical earthquakes. This is a figure I made for the 2015 update, but it hasn't changed a lot. There's just a lot of background activity all around Nevada. Familiar with activity out by Prison Hill. A lot of activity in the northern Pinelands. And then swarms. I'll mention a potential volcanic dike that was injected in the bottom of the crust at the end of this talk. And this is that area right in here where that happened. And we don't really know where the 1887 earthquake was. I kind of put it between Genoa and Carson City. May have been on this side of Valley at depth. But, so lots of background earthquakes around Carson City. And as far as earthquakes that have strongly shaken the city, we've had 13 to 14 that have had intensity 6 or larger, and over the last 150, 160 years. So anyway, it's about an event every 12 years when you average those out. And one of those was pretty darn, would have required a bit of not only a response, but a little bit of recovery for the city. And that was once in the last 160 years. That's that 1887 earthquake. As far as faults, quaternary faults that could cause earthquakes, they're all around the city. They're within the city. There's a higher density of faults in Carson City than there is in Los Angeles or places like that. Now, those faults in Los Angeles are a lot faster, and they have other characteristics. But nevertheless, it's a metric that we've got a lot of earthquake faults around, and we have trenched a lot of them and found paleo earthquakes on them. So here's the Genoa fault. If you can see my cursor, is the big one that's bounding the west side of Carson Valley there. And again, this is why it's so beautiful. This is one of the fastest faults in Nevada. As it comes towards Carson City, it splays into the Kings Canyon Fault, the Carson City Fault, and the Indian Hill Fault. And during the last earthquake, around 300 years ago on this fault, that offset the ground well over 20 feet, all three of these faults probably broke at the same time. So the earthquake probably started somewhere up here and ruptured into the city. There's a lot of faults going at one time. We don't think it always does that. And the eastern side of Carson Valley is just shattered with faults that are very, very young. Everything around here is less than 3 million years old. Sounds like a long time, but it's really not. Considering Reno goes back, say, 20 million years for the formation of our basin in Reno. This is a view to the north. Carson City's here, Washoe Lake in the background there, and Indian Hill down here. And just to show you some of these faults, here's the Indian Hill fault coming along. You can actually see it in the landscape there. And going along and crossing and heading over to Prison Hill. And this is the beginning of the Carson City fault. You can see the shaded scarps there. And it goes around the city, around Sea Hill, down Minnesota Avenue, I think. And then crosses and heads to the northeast. And Kings Canyon Fault's the big one in the back. That's the range bending fault, that's back there. So we can see a lot of evidence of these in the landscape. It's kind of a mystery. We don't have faults mapped in the northern pine nuts. That's our fault. They're there. We just haven't really had a focus to do that. And I'll just remind you that in that northern pine nuts, there's a lot of background seismicity. There are faults in here. I've mapped a few of them, but I haven't been able to get a grant to do something systematic. I want to just remind you of the 3D character of these faults a little bit. So here's a schematic diagram showing different faults. Here's the Kings Canyon Fault, for example, Genoa Fault down here. Lake Tahoe, this is that shattered East Carson Valley fault system. And here's Carson City County. And so if we take a look at a 3D cross-section, or do a cross-section through here, for example, here again is that Kings Canyon Fault. If we project that at depth, this is what it would look like. So here's Lake Tahoe here, the Incline Village Fault coming down, Carson Range. This is Little Basin, Eagle Valley, and Carson City setting in here. And here's the Kings Canyon Fault going down. This is about 6 miles down, 9 miles down. And so it's common for earthquakes, the larger earthquakes, to actually nucleate down near the bottom of the fault. That's where it's the strongest. So if you break that, the rest of the fault can cut loose. And you can see an earthquake down near the bottom of the Kings Canyon Fault would actually project up and have an epicenter on the east side of Carson City and would rupture under the city. So these are big things that go to a long depth, and this would cause probably 20, 30 seconds of shaking, pretty severe shaking. This is an out-of-date figure. I apologize for that. I really haven't. There's a lot of new studies that have been done, so that's kind of exciting. But these are the paleo earthquakes that we found in 2015, say. And there's some faults here. There's magnitudes down here of what we think those earthquakes could have been. And then the time between, the elapsed time between events. And we know we have more earthquakes than are here, and so this would be the longest time that could have happened. But 300 years ago, we probably had the big Genoa Fault move, and then 100 years before that, Mount Rose Fault near Reno had a pretty good sized earthquake. Genoa's 7.2, maybe a little larger, and Reno would be about a 6.9. And 100 years before that, Incline Village Fault had perhaps a magnitude 7 earthquake. So every 100 years or thereabouts, we are having major earthquakes in this region. What are the chances that Carson City will experience a strong earthquake in the next 50 years? To kind of look at this, we have this funny diagram. This is from the National Seismic Hazard Map, and it's called the hazard curve, and it's for earthquakes. On the bottom, this is ground motion. It gets stronger this way. It's in G. This is 1G, so if you had more than this in vertical, you'd get thrown in the air. 1/10 of a G, 100th of a G. This is pretty weak over here. And then this is how frequently that occurs. Kind of a funny thing here, but this would be once a year, once every 10 years, and once every 100 years, and so on. And so they analyze the faults and the earthquakes in the area, and we come up with these curves. And actually, this is the building code line, so this is where the buildings are designed for, right, in this area. And these are those modified Mercalli intensities, and we've got some, they've been correlated with the ground motion that might occur with them. And so we can come up to this line, and then come over here, and consider a Poisson process, a 50-year Poisson process. So it's a little bit of mathematics there, but we can come up with some probabilities for these modified Mercalli intensities. So that's what we've done for Carson City. And here are some of the results. So for that modified Mercalli intensity 6, where we have cracked walls, people frightened, in the next 50 years, 78 to 79% chance. There's a high probability, and you saw all those earthquakes that in the past would cause that, so that makes sense. In fact, it seems like it could be even a little higher. For intensity 7, now we're talking about chimney damage and an emergency response of some kind. A little over 50 chance in the next 50 years for Carson City. So it's a good chance you're going to have an emergency response to an earthquake. For intensity 8, where the weaker buildings, unreinforced masonry, those kind, could be damaged, potentially severely. It's about a 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 chance in the next 50 years. And this will involve a recovery effort of some kind, probably on the order of 3-year recovery effort. The last one, intensity 9, that's an earthquake that's so serious that actually even modern buildings have some damage. 6 to 10%, so fortunately a pretty low probability, but that's some serious reconstruction at Carson City. So the earthquake hazard is very real there. And I'll just show you this one hazard curve. Carson City's in green, and the higher you are in the curve, the more hazardous it is. And here's Salt Lake City, for example, and Las Vegas is there. Reno's not on here, but Reno would start a little lower, kind of go over the curve here, and then come down and mesh with Salt Lake City. So Carson City truly does have the highest hazard of the basin range problems. A lot of things do happen. That earthquakes are these comprehensive disasters. They're spatially, they're widely distributed. Everybody gets affected at once, instantaneous, just a lot of nasties with them. And there's these other aspects such as rock falls and landslides that can occur, liquefaction I mentioned, fire following earthquake, multiple hazmat incidences, maybe one that requires downwind evacuation, communication failures. It's going to be really hard to talk to people. And a hint is text. Texts can go through because they use such a small package of information to be sent. And then potentially a tsunami and SAISH if Lake Tahoe itself is affected. So a synopsis is that there's very serious earthquake hazard in Carson City, and it's a matter of time before a damaging and potentially deadly earthquake occurs. What I don't know is where Carson City is right now on addressing this threat. Because I know it has been taken seriously, and I know there's been a lot of effort to think about it and do things. So I know there's building code requirements for the seismic provisions. That's excellent. Keep that up. That's the largest investment that society makes in earthquakes. Public awareness, it's a continuous campaign. Keep people aware and especially knowing how to drop, cover, and hold and those things. That keeps people from getting injured. And then the vulnerable buildings always remain a challenge. I put in the report I did in 2015 a number of mitigative steps that can be considered. As I said, drop, cover, and hold on. Universal message. Everybody needs to know this, period. And you keep the safety messages in front of the public, flyers, website, these windows of opportunity, the earthquakes that occur in Nevada or California or elsewhere. Use those as reminders that, hey, check out that beautiful mountain out there. That's how I got there. Keep up the building codes. You're doing that, just keep it up. I know that there's been an inventory of unreinforced masonry buildings in Carson City. I don't know whether that's progressed to the point of prioritizing the risk of those buildings. So a building that's right downtown that a lot of people are around, that's a high-risk building versus, say, an old brick building in the field. We ought to kind of know what the most dangerous buildings are and begin to do at least strategies for handling them. This is a hard thing to do, but have some strategies. So it's, You know, we really should tear that building down, or we really should get a pre-disaster mitigation grant and hold that up because it's City Hall or something. Have strategies. That's easier to do than actually doing something. It's important to have in hand. Now, oh, still there?
Yes, we are.
Okay, my screen kind of went black. I'll get faster here. Maybe I'm supposed to speed up. So anyway, steadily push to mitigate buildings, and I think I just have one more slide here. So I also was tasked with volcanoes, tsunamis, and landslides. Well, volcanoes, this is still a low hazard. There are volcanoes in Lake Tahoe. McClellan Peak is a quaternary volcano. It's about 1.3 million years ago. That was erupting and flows were going down, crossing Highway 50. Basically, Carson City would have had to have been evacuated. We have had some dikes injected at the base of the crust in northern Lake Tahoe and a few things, so it's a low activity. We're going to learn a lot more about this, and hopefully we're going to get a study where we're going to look at the volcanic hazard in Nevada. But it's low, but it could turn high within about a 6-month period, so I'm not sure what to do with that. Except maybe grab a plan from Portland and just have it on the shelf in case you got to figure out things quickly. The Lake Tahoe tsunami sage. In this, so if you offset the bottom of the water body, that water's got to go somewhere. If you lift half the lake up and leave the other half down, the water's going to equilibrate. That's the tsunami. And then it'll potentially rock back and forth, or it may rock back and forth from a distant earthquake, and that's called a sage. It's like a wave in a bathtub or something like that. The good news for Carson City is there's a limited exposure to that. You only have a small lakefront area. And I can't study, or I haven't studied the tsunami safety zone or the run-up zones, but they don't seem large for Lake Tahoe studies like having. If you can get 50 feet or 70 feet up, that might do you, and that's not too much to ask. It's also not too much to ask for, say, if you do have an active beach, to put a lookout tower on it or something that people could get up into. But basically, whatever the number of lakeside residents is, you might be able to just handle those individually and have them have their little tsunami safety area they can go to. And on landslides, we're talking about steep terrain usually, faulted fronts. The front of the Kings Canyon fault has a lot of little landslides that have come off of it. The deep canyons, Kings Canyon, Ash Canyon. I'm not sure if this has been done, but need to get an inventory of where landslides have occurred before, and take a look if there's runout areas and if there's risk in those areas, new areas as well. And just plan to try to keep critical facilities and things like that out of those landslide areas. I would say would be at least a first order suggestion. So that's what I have, and I'd be happy to take any questions or anything.
Can Craig hear us?
Craig, this is Tom Ra. We had some correspondence about a year ago. I'm the former retired deputy emergency manager here in Carson. It was probably a year and a half ago, we corresponded, and you said the 2016 assessment, the study that was done for the 2016 plan, would roll over and still be good for this new plan. Are you still consistent with that?
Yeah, there really haven't been any big changes, any new discoveries that would change the fundamental outcome. There have been more trenches. You probably heard about some of those, and better dating on some of the paleo events. So we have a little better idea there. Can always update the seismicity map. We went 2014. I think we have, in my hazard, we can make a map up to 2019 now. So you're welcome to do that. But basically, it should be good for now. I'm hoping these reports that I do last for 10 or 20 years. they're pretty detailed. Anyway, so
That's perfect.
should be good for them.
Perfect. That'll make our time frame move a little bit faster.
Excellent. What I would do is do review the recommendations, the actions and all that, the goals and things like that. And I would try to make a little progress this upcoming time. If you haven't prioritized the URM buildings, I would really push on that one. So kind of come up with your, whatever the worst buildings are, these 15 are the ones that, boy, if we could get the opportunity to do something someday, we'd really like to reduce the risk of these. That'd be great to have in hand.
Anyone else? Questions? Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break before I go to the next presenter.
You was the
So
instructor.
first day the boss is
Yes.
like throwing
I'm
it.
hanging out with a couple
Did you
tourists.
throw it
Where's
behind
it?
you? It'll fly on you.
So next up, we're gonna have Chris Malcolm. He's gonna join us here. Okay, next up is Chris Malcolm from National Weather Service. And if you guys can do your magic with the internet, we'll get him up on the screen.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Go ahead.
All right, let's do that. Okay, so the screen is shared, and you should see my slide up there. Looks like it. I can see it on the video. So.
Yep.
All right. I'll go ahead and get started. Name is Chris Malcolm. I'm with the National Weather Service Forecast Office located in Reno. We're up by TMCC, and we do the forecasts and warnings for the entire Eastern Sierra, Lake Tahoe, and Western Nevada. So if you ever hear like a severe thunderstorm warning or flash flood warning that interrupts your favorite TV program, that's us. We're putting those alerts out to get everybody ready for severe weather. And so that goes to what I'm going to talk about is our take on the severe weather hazards for Carson City. I will touch a little bit on floods. I know Rob went into detail on that, so I won't spend too much time, but we do have some other points on floods. I'll also talk about the exact opposite, which is drought, and that's a serious situation that we're potentially entering right now. And actually the last time we did a hazard mitigation plan update, we were right at the very end of a very, very significant drought that affected much of the western U.S. And so here we are again. And then avalanche. I don't have a whole lot to say on that, but I will talk about that. So this picture is from the Silver Saddle Ranch. I ran the Escape from Prison Hill half marathon back in April. I'm a huge runner. Any of you who get our briefings and stuff know that already. So I look forward to being back in Carson City. The Tahoe Rim Trail endurance runs are happening in July, and they're actually changing the route now. So they're starting out at the college, which is great. So we get a lot more climb that way, which is always good. All right, so I do want to show this. This is not in the presentation, but it's something I thought of before we got started today. The weather station network in Carson City from a variety of sources, whether it be from the Weather Service or other sources, is actually not too bad. This is just a map showing the current wind gusts from those various weather stations as we speak right now. You can actually see the network of the Tahoe, Lake Tahoe buoys out here, which is always a valuable resource if you're out on the lake. But here's the Carson City Airport. Right here, we have a variety of NDOT weather stations, like up on Highway 50 here, and then one down at the junction of 50 and 395, another on the north side of town here at Arrowhead. So it's a really decent network of stations that we make use of to issue forecasts and warnings, but it's something also that folks can monitor on their own. Especially, for example, like fire weather, as it's getting breezy and dry out there. So to that point, to the fire weather piece, we've been working extensively with the various utilities, including Liberty, NV Energy, PG&E, and Southern California Edison, to help identify places where they can install weather stations to help monitor fire weather conditions a little bit more accurately, especially as it pertains to their network. They're concerned about issues where electric utilities infrastructure could potentially start a fire during a really high wind situation. And so to that point, actually one station that just came online not too long ago is here in Voltaire Canyon. It's actually from NV Energy. So you can actually make use of that data. It's publicly available and monitor the weather that way. So there's more stations coming online. NV Energy is doing a really great job of getting new data installed in some key areas that have helped us immensely, but also helped them monitor the weather situation. So I did want to bring that up as something that popped into my mind while I was waiting. So we'll get to the presentation here. And so drought. This is a recurring hazard for the whole western U.S., but Carson City, of course, we're no stranger to drought in the area. And it's not just a lack of rain and snow, that warm temperatures in the changing climate can actually act to intensify drought. And that was one thing about that drought that we had in 2013, 14, 15 that made it different, that made it much harsher, was that the temperatures were so much more above normal compared to previous droughts, say in the 70s and 80s. You know, it was dry, but it wasn't quite as hot. So when you have hot temperatures, that dries out the soils and vegetation even more. So it's kind of a vicious circle there. And also there's different types of drought. There's actually things called a snow drought, where you may actually have normal precipitation, but it's warmer, so it all comes down as rain and not as much as snow. And so that really affects how much water supply you have that following summer. And so that's called a snow drought. Well, the drought we're in now is just a drought. It is both rain, snow, warm temperatures, and so we're entering this new phase of drought. So, you know, the impacts are widespread. So fires are, of course, the big one, and there is increased concern this summer for the higher elevations up at Tahoe and the west side of Carson City. The trees are stressed more so than normal based on what we're hearing, and so that's something to be concerned about. And that's not just this year, but in following years, as long as we're in a drought situation. Of course, water supply, the health of the forest, all of that is an impact. So looking back at the U.S. Drought Monitor, this is a service that incorporates data but also impacts, and it creates a drought classification. So this time in 2015, we were in the D4, which is the worst of the worst drought. This is Dust Bowl kind of stuff. This is a big drought, big impacts. And then as we go along, so I'm going to fast forward each year. So 2016, we had a little bit more precipitation, but we were still in the D3, so still pretty significant drought. And then 2017 happened, as Rob talked about. A hydrologist that some of you might know, Gary Barbato here at the Weather Service, he's retired now, but he said the best way or the quickest way to end a drought in Nevada is with a flood. Well, we took care of that in 2017, so there's the drought. And 2018, we still had plenty of moisture, and so the drought really wasn't a factor in 2018. 2019, you remember how winter was then? It was all about February. Remember how snowy February 2019 was? And so the whole state, nothing. That's almost unheard of, you know, for Nevada not to have any drought in the whole state. And then, into 2019, 2020, we had a drier than normal winter, and then this last winter was just, it was much drier than normal. We really lacked any of those early season rainstorms that would moisten up the soils. And so the drought is developing. And so Carson City right now is officially in the D2 to D3 drought classification. A lot of southern Nevada is in that D4 drought. And that's actually because the monsoon did not show up last year, the thunderstorms. Eastern and southern Nevada depend much more heavily on the monsoon for their annual precipitation. Whereas here in Carson City, we depend a lot more on the winter precipitation. So it's all about what we get or don't get in the winter that determines our drought status. This is another way of looking at it for Carson City. It's the percent of the city that is in a certain drought classification over a function of time. So here is January of the year 2000, and then basically January of each year through the current time. Look at this, just monster drought here in 2014, 15, and into 16 of that D4. And then boom, all of a sudden, not much, and then it's starting to come back. So of course the question is this a drought that's going to last for a long time, or is it just, okay, we're going to get back to a wet winter next year? We don't know. And that's one thing with drought, is the predictability of it is very limited. And I think that's an important point about any of our hazards. And you could even take this to earthquakes as well, is what is the predictability of that hazard? Because that informs how you mitigate and how you prepare for that hazard. Something that's really predictable a long time in advance, there's a lot more that you can do. But if it's totally unpredictable, then that may limit certain things that you're able to do. And so with drought, that's just one thing. We know it's happened in the past. It's going to happen again, but in terms of when and how bad, that's not something that we know as much about. Although with climate change, the models are indicating the frequency of drought would increase in the western U.S. All right, so looking back at the climate situation, just to get a little bit more into some of the data that goes to drought. We've obviously, since we did the last hazard mitigation plan, we've had very wet periods, 2017. We've also had very, very dry periods. And so the graph that you're looking at is a running total accumulation of precipitation since October 1st of 2014. So we're looking at basically the year 2015 onward. And the green line is the observed total precipitation. So this is rain plus snow melted down into a water form. And then the brown line is what is average. Now, what I'm showing you here is from our co-op site in Minden. And so there is, why are you showing us Minden? You know, don't you have any data for Carson City? Well, I do. The one issue is we have had considerable missing observations from that observation site. A lot of these observations are volunteer-based, and sometimes people move or you know, they lose interest. And so this has been a challenge for us. You know, we're working on, you know, a more reliable observing situation in Carson City at this time. But so the next best thing for me is to look at that Minden observation, just because it really is a robust period of record. So you can see that actually, if you add up all the precipitation since 2014, we're actually above where we should be. It's like, okay, then why are we in such a bad drought? Well, it's because we've largely flatlined. We have not gained as much as we should since about 2019. Since that really wet period in January and February of 2019, things have kind of tapered off significantly. And then you can also see here that really wet period at the end of 2016 and going into 2017 there. So in terms of our climate here, we're a very boom-bust climate here in Nevada, in Carson City specifically. You can think about it to like mining and some of the, you know, the gold rush. You know, it's very boom-bust. Well, our climate is that way too. We have these big wet winters, and then we go dry for several in a row. And so that's where, you know, the drought is a recurring thing, because we do have these prolonged multi-year periods of very dry weather. That is a fairly normal thing for our region. So looking at focusing in more on that since October of 2019, this is that same graph, except I started the clock at October of 2019. You can see this very significant precip deficits here. And then here, even at Tahoe City, it's the same thing. And in fact, if you look at it, it's almost a year's worth of precipitation that we're behind since 2019, since that last wet period. So when we went dry, we went really dry and in a hurry, and that's why that drought classification has increased so much. So nearly a year's worth of precipitation there. So it's also been fairly warm. This is looking at temperature anomalies over the last 5 or 6 years. And you can see in general, we've been much warmer than normal. The one exception was 2019. That ended up being kind of a more of a normal year, which is a little unusual in the current climate. Most years, it's been warmer than normal. Top third to top 10% in the historical record in terms of how much above normal those temperatures are. And as, you know, I already talked about those, you know, have impacts on drought. So drought's a significant issue for our area. It's happening now. It will happen again. There'll be peaks and valleys of it. We'll have wet periods, but we also have very dry periods. So drought is virtually guaranteed to be an issue for the region in the coming years in terms of planning and mitigation. So avalanche, I don't have a whole lot to share on this. This is really not our bread and butter. We do have a partner called the Sierra Avalanche Center. They're located up in Truckee. They're the ones that do avalanche warnings for the Tahoe backcountry, which does include the east side of Tahoe in the Carson City area. And so they do issue warnings for this. And so, you know, the region could get avalanches because if you get a really heavy snow event or a series of heavy snowstorms, and we do have that steep enough terrain that you could get avalanche impacts. But fortunately for most of the city, they're kind of in the backcountry. So other than folks that are out there, the impact probably wouldn't be as significant. But if you want additional information, I would encourage you reaching out to the Sierra Avalanche Center for more on that. All right, so severe weather and high winds. Here's a classic picture of a tipped over semi during a high wind prohibition on Highway 395 in Washoe Valley. I'll just sort of leave it at that. The region, of course, is very prone to high winds. We are no stranger to high winds with gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour. Somewhat common, especially during the spring, winter, and fall months. That's when we tend to get those high wind events. And that's actually something that, as you know, especially last year is a really good example, is the later into the fall that we get that first winter storm with actual precipitation, That increases the risk of dry conditions overlapping with one of these early season high wind events and creating a very critical fire weather situation. So in terms of fire weather for the Sierra Front, including Carson City, we all think of summer as the core fire season, which it totally is. It is a very concerning time for fire, but honestly the fall, to me, is when we could get the most catastrophic fires, just because that's when we do start seeing those really big wind events start impinging on the already dry conditions and dry vegetation that we have. So that's something we're working with fire agencies to message to the public that is an increasing issue. So there have been 159 episodes of high winds that were logged in our storm data database since 2015. Now that is for the entire Sierra Front zone, so all the way from Reno to Minden, but that does incorporate Carson City. So again, that just goes to say, high winds, 60 miles an hour with potential impacts are certainly no stranger to the area. Most frequent in October through April, resulting in damage, power outages, wildfires, of course. Tipped over trash cans. I used to have something called the trash can scale that was frowned upon by higher ups in the Weather Service for how strong the winds are going to be. And to that point, when it came to winter storms, I actually used to have a thing called the wine scale, which is how much wine should I buy before the blizzard keeps me stuck at home for days on end. Well, that one got the kibosh put on it. Anyway, I tried. So along with winds, red flag warnings, those are the warnings that we issue to alert our fire agency partners and the public of a situation where it's unusually windy and dry, or there could be thunderstorms with little or no rainfall that could all result in numerous large new fires. So anytime there's a red flag warning, my message to folks, if I get interviewed, is like, you shouldn't do stupid stuff to start a fire on any day, but definitely don't do it on a red flag day, because those are the days when the fires take off really, really quickly. So you can see the criteria for our red flag warnings there. Here is the number of red flag days that we issue for the Sierra Front fire weather zone. Of course, that covers from Reno to Carson City to Minden. Well, 2020 just set the standard for that. Between winds and low humidity, but also dry lightning, dry thunderstorms. We had a number of those days, and that's what happened over in California in the middle of August. Was they got hit with numerous thunderstorms with dry lightning, and that's what caused all the smoke and fires in California, the catastrophic fires. So you can see the large interannual variability in the number of red flag days. There's really no cycle. Sometimes we have really big summers. Other times we have very quiet summers. And you can see actually 2019 was one of the quietest. And then boom, then we hit 2020. So there's really no predictability on that in terms of the cycle from year to year. But we're virtually guaranteed to always have red flag days in Carson City, whether it be just 8 or whether it be 30 in a year. So it will be an issue, those high wind days with low humidity. And actually, we're given how the spring has gone already, we're probably going to be starting those earlier than normal just because it's been so dry. All right, so heavy snow, so we're going to go from fire to snow. Obviously, heavy snow, we do get that in the region. It does vary in the storm. Sometimes it's just sort of a nuisance snow. Other times it truly is a heavy snow that causes, basically very difficult travel, closures of schools and businesses and things like that. But the frequency does vary widely from year to year. You can kind of sense a theme here. A lot of our hazards in the weather world, in our part of Nevada, are quite variable from year to year to year. So we've had 67 episodes of heavy snow in our database since 2015 through 2020. Again, that's for that broader Sierra Front zone. And generally, it's about 6 inches or more of snowfall from any given storm. So not as frequent as high wind events, but still frequent enough where it is a potential issue for the region. December through March is our prime time for those heavy snows. And one little bonus nugget for Carson City specifically is you all are prone to lake effect snow, which you might assume, oh, that's a Chicago thing or a Buffalo thing. No, we actually get lake effect snow off of Lake Tahoe. We actually also get it off of Lake Pyramid Lake. And those are really narrow bands of very, very heavy snow. And the one that I always remember, it was about 10 plus years ago, it was around Veterans Day in November, dumped about 1 foot or 2 of snow in Carson City, but if you drove up to Washoe Valley, there was nothing. So very narrow bands of very heavy snow, so we can get that. All right, so looking at snowfall since 2015, this is again for that Minden NWS Cooperative Observer site. You can see as a whole, if you track it, if you reset the clock January 2015, we're actually doing okay on snowfall, but it just hasn't been quite as much in the last year or so as compared to some of these big years in 2017. Look at 2019. Look at how much snow fell there. Well, let's take a look at the bar graph there. This is the monthly snowfall total for Minden. So Carson City, the amounts were probably fairly similar. Look at it. Here's February of 2019, over 30 inches of snow in just 1 month. So there's your boom and bust climate right there. There's December of 2016. That's actually January 2017 is this other one here, over 20 inches of snow. So this little bar graph here is actually November of 2020, where we actually picked up, Carson City probably didn't get quite as much, but down toward Minden, it was over a foot of snow. And that was an interesting situation because we thought, oh, that's the fire season's done, right? You know, we got a foot of snow on the ground, 6 inches or more, it's done, right? No, well, just a week later, we had the catastrophic fires in Collin Ranch and then down towards Walker and Colville. And it's like, wow, you know, so that moisture, it was so dry that even that moisture didn't moisten up the vegetation enough to quell those large fires. All right, so this is just some info on flooding and heavy rains, and Rob did a really nice job a very detailed job of the impacts for Carson City. So I'm just going to kind of touch on more of the meteorological backstory on things. So our storm data database isn't too good for flooding. That's where Rob really has a good database of where flooding or heavy rains, you know, affect Carson City. You can see in the USGS river and stream gauging here, and this is what you're looking at here, that it was all about 2017, at least in the last 5 or 6 years. And you look at that spike just above the flood stage there at the on the main stem Carson River there at Carson City. But we've had other spikes as well. Some of these are from snowmelt. Some of these are just from some heavy rain events. And then here's Kings Canyon. Look at that spike, and that's all during that January and February 2017 events. Otherwise, the creek is relatively benign, not a whole lot going on, but boom, all of a sudden, it has significant flows there. So it's really about, you know, as Rob mentioned, you know, the winter months really are the big ones for us. We do get those summer flash flood events. At least in the last 5 years, they have not been as frequent in the Carson City area, but just next door in Johnson Lane, they've been a huge problem over the last 5 years and 5 or 10 years with the summer thunderstorms. So that tells you that it's an issue for our region, and so at some point in time, Carson City will be hit by another summertime flash flood. But the big one to me are those winter atmospheric rivers. Those are the ones that are going to cause widespread river flooding, urban flooding. Storm drains aren't going to keep up. And that was something interesting about 2017, that while the main rivers did flood, like the Truckee up here in Reno, the Carson, through the Carson Valley and Carson City, it was really those small creeks and streams, such as like Kings Canyon here, that really caused a lot of the issues in 2017. So I think that's, everybody thinks about, oh, it's the big rivers that are the problem, and yes, they are a risk. They definitely are a risk. But it's really a lot of these small creeks and streams where, you know, a lot of houses aren't too far away from them that tend to cause a lot more of the issues. So looking at kind of a heavy rain climatology of Carson City, so I'm looking at, you know, what are the days where we get 10% of our annual average precipitation falling in one day. So, you know, again, I use the Minden station. So their average precip is 9.1 inches. So let's say if we get 9/10 of an inch of rain in one day, we'll call that heavy rain. That seems pretty robust for Western Nevada, given our relatively dry climate here. It's pretty wide variability, but we've had 11 instances of that heavy rainfall since 2013. Of course, 2017 is the big winner there, with 6 days of at least 9/10 of an inch of precipitation in one day. So again, wide year-to-year variability, but it is a risk. When it rains here, it can rain very hard. And so here's the 2017 atmospheric river. This is the river gauge on the actual Carson River, just southeast of Prison Hill there, and you can see it going. This is the blue line here, is the observed, going above the flood stage here. Here's the forecast. You know, so again, just 24, 48-hour lead time, and the forecast still underdid that flood crest. So yeah, that still remains a little bit of a challenge for us in terms of predictability. So here's some pictures here. Rob showed some. These are some that we gathered from our briefing that morning of February 8th. It really was the January event was impactful, but the February one seemed to be the bigger problem for a lot of the Carson City and Carson Valley areas. And that was this atmospheric river that was just off the charts strong. The 750 units in this scale is strong, which would be yellow, and here we are at red, just heading right toward us. So just tremendous amounts of moisture heading right toward us. So I do want to talk about that. This was mentioned already, is that the post-fire debris flows and flash floods are an increasing issue across the western U.S. and across the Great Basin, and it's something we do need to take seriously when it comes to when we do have a large fire again, which unfortunately probably will happen at some point, is that post-fire flooding. So when we get these really intense fires, especially when they're in the timber or pinyon juniper areas, they lead to this increased runoff. It's called hydrophobic soils. Basically, the soils are afraid of water, is essentially what it means. And it just runs off into the ground because the soil is essentially cooked. It just runs off, so it can't percolate into the ground. It just runs off and creates flooding. The one thing is with these is in terms of planning and preparedness and mitigation, they really are a problem because they occur with almost no warning, with even just 5 minutes of intense rainfall. And even just an inch an hour rainfall rate, that is enough that we've seen on these debris flows, including this one here as an example, on Highway 395 at Topaz off the Slinkard fire in 2018. So it doesn't take much, just a brief bit of very intense rainfall to create these potentially very damaging debris flows. So our storm data record only has one in Carson City, but we know the geography and the fire risk. The risk of these is fairly substantial, and I would definitely encourage awareness and preparedness of these. I think, especially as the climate is changing and fires are potentially becoming more severe, especially when you get those fires, those plume-dominated fires that look like a bomb went off. Those are the ones that really create those hydrophobic soils and create a very, very serious flash flood risk. All right, so severe weather, summer thunderstorms, we do get those. That's a lightning strike I took out of my backyard a few years ago. There's the weather guy getting out into the lightning there. Summer thunderstorms, of course, can produce all these hazards: high winds, microburst, dust storms, and yes, we even get tornadoes periodically. So we did not have any thunderstorms directly affect Carson City in terms of severe weather. Now, of course, we did have thunderstorms of more of a garden variety affect Carson City since 2015, but in terms of actual documented impacts like large hail or microburst winds or things like that, we didn't get any reports in the city. And that goes to the importance of spotters and posting on our social media. That way we know what's going on. But of course we knew, there's flash flooding in nearby Johnson Lane. So we know it's right across the border in Douglas County. So it's certainly a risk here for some of that to happen. Of course, June through August are the most common months for thunderstorms. We've even had them in the winter though. So what I did, since we didn't have any actual reports of severe thunderstorm impacts in Carson City, what I did is went back and looked at how many warnings did we issue for Carson City, which could indicate, okay, there is at least a threat of those severe weather impacts. And so here we had all these warnings, 13 severe thunderstorm warnings for hail or high winds, 7 flash flood warnings, 1 dust storm warning, and yes, even 1 tornado warning. We did actually get a confirmed water spout over Lake Tahoe. It was more on the north side of the lake on September 13th of 2017, but the warning that we put out did include that western part of Carson City up at Lake Tahoe. So severe storms are a hazard for Carson City. Are they the most frequent hazard? Probably not, but they are definitely something that we should be mindful of, especially during the summer. So I'm going to finish up my presentation here with just one other consideration that I think is worth at least considering, debating, talking about, but I just want to throw it out there, is smoke from fires. We saw this last summer in spades just because of these significant, massive fires in California just sending smoke our way. And the societal impacts to public health, to schools, And this is something that we interacted with a lot with the Washoe County School District here in Reno because of coronavirus. They were doing in-person education, but they needed to be able to bring in fresh air from the outside to have classes. Well, when the smoke is so thick that it's hazardous air quality, then they can't do that. And so we were actually briefing them on the smoke forecast, and so they would make a decision on whether to go or no go on in-person education. So I think this is something mitigation aspect. But whether it could be like schools being prepared to filter dense smoke better, or office buildings, or something like that. I'm just thinking out loud, but I think it's something that we could talk about at some point down the road. So that is what I've got in my presentation. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing there, and I don't know if there are any questions or comments. Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, well, Rachel's getting my presentation up. I'm Nikki Aker, Director of Carson City Health and Human Services. A lot of you have heard a lot about us recently. When public health or health is doing good, you don't really hear a lot about us. But then if there's an issue that comes out, then you do hear from public health. Just some background information. Our mission to protect and improve the quality of life for our community through disease prevention, education, and support services. A lot of what has been brought up today, we have at periodic times done a lot of education about it, especially with the smoke or whether we try and get education out, or we are involved in whatever is happening. Our vision, CCHHS leads the region providing services that support healthy communities. Our values, respect for others, we treat everyone equally. We've heard a lot about that through COVID. It's that equity piece. Competence, we stay current with the latest resources available. Collaboration, we work together to meet the mission and move towards our vision. Health departments are a lot about that convening people, that collaboration, and getting organizations together. Ethical, we work professionally, respecting confidentiality and allowing laws and regulations. And one thing I'll mention just real quickly, and this may be, I don't know if FEMA finds this important or not, but we are an accredited health department and have been since May 2016. When we talk about hazards and hazard mitigation, we've got two divisions that are really involved, and that is our disease prevention and control division, and that's that epidemiology piece. So it's looking at the disease, using some of the language from COVID. It's that disease investigation, that contact tracing, looking at the data and what's the data telling us, and tracking. So we have the public health surveillance and detection, the outbreak investigation, that equates to the contact tracers or the disease investigations. Prior to COVID, this was something we did every day. We do it for a lot of different diseases, and I'll go over some of those, and of course the compiling of the data. And then another big division that works when we have these different hazards that we are dealing with is public health preparedness. You've heard a lot about the Quad County. The Quad County, that's Carson City, Douglas, Lyon, and Story counties. That division is 100% grant funded. And because of the way we're funded from the state, that's how come we have the Quad Counties. And the mission of, we call it PHP, so that's our acronym, is to prevent, respond to, and rapidly recover from public health threats to the community. It's by engaging in that community response. Again, it's getting the organizations, entities together. Community preparedness activities. We, for years, were doing what you call the drive-through or walk-up pods, meaning a point of dispensing. For years, we did it with flu shots. And so when COVID hit, we've been practicing for a long time, and are we still learning? You bet we are. And we learn something new with every event, but Carson City Health and Human Services has been practicing this for a long time. And healthcare system preparedness activities. So these are, when we're not dealing with a big, with a pandemic, you know, we're working on different plans. We're exercising those plans. We're talking to our community members, the organizations within our community, our schools, and our healthcare facilities. Okay, so just a couple terms to talk about an outbreak. It's something small, but it's unusual. It's a disease that is noticeable, often small, but it's an increase over what we would expect. So some examples of that would be measles or pertussis. An epidemic, it's bigger and it's spreading. It's an outbreak over a larger geographical area, and the examples are H1N1 in 2009 to 10, and then the Zika virus. And now what we're in, a pandemic. It's international, it's out of control, a disease that spreads to multiple countries or regions, and that's COVID. And that's kind of how I feel in the little corner there. I'm not going to go through all this, but in the Nevada Administrative Code 441A, this is a list of all the reportable diseases. So if any of these diseases show up, then they have to notify the health department, and then we're doing an investigation. Next slide. Again, more. So it's a long list. Go ahead. And more. And of course, this year we had COVID added. So history. You've all heard of the Spanish flu. Measles. In 2019, so I'm just going to give some highlights of what's happened since the last plan. 2019, 1,282 measles cases were confirmed in 31 states. That included an outbreak that happened at UNR. And this happened 2 decades after measles was declared eliminated in 2000. So one thing that we are concerned about is the vaccination rates are very low right now because of COVID, people not going to their doctors, and we could very likely see a measles outbreak. Of course, we had the Ebola outbreak, pertussis. That's something else that we're worried about seeing because people are not vaccinated.
In 2017, we responded to a pertussis outbreak across three counties, Carson, Douglas, and Lyon counties. The outbreak lasted 2.5 months. There were 10 cases, 5 daycares, 1 group home, and 95 close contacts. So you can kind of imagine how time-consuming these outbreaks are. And so we're already starting, the clinic is starting, putting out some reminders for people to get back in and get vaccinated. We had the H1N1 influenza. We had now a rabies outbreak. It was in the last mitigation plan, but that was an interesting thing that took a lot of our time also. It involved a puppy. And it was interesting social media wise on what all happened with that. So we met West Nile virus. Now we haven't seen too much of West Nile virus. When we got the drought, you know, that's spread by the mosquito. So the West Nile incident decreases. And then as we have wetter winters, then we are looking for that West Nile. And at the health department, we do mosquito abatement. And that's something occasionally we have to go and ask for more money depending on how the winter went. And actually right now, we collaborate with some other counties with the helicopters. Other counties are looking at other ways to do mosquito abatement, and so we're researching a drone. And SARS is another one, and then of course COVID. You may not be able to see this, it's pretty small. Foodborne illness. So top 5 germs that cause illness in the U.S. are norovirus, Salmonella, Clostridium perfringens, Campylobacter, and Staphylococcus aureus. That's also known as staph. You guys hear of staph infections and that. And then the germs that cause illness that likely lead to hospitalization is botulism, Listeria, E. coli, and Vibrillo. And in 2016, CCHHS staff responded to a family reunion outbreak of GI symptoms associated with a local casino. 11 out of the 47 became ill. We sent surveys to all the participants or individuals that attended that family reunion. No one ill that submitted samples for testing. No one ill submitted samples, so we couldn't get somebody that was actually ill to submit samples for us. There were no ill food service workers, and there were no other complaints from other patrons. So based on what we found out from the surveys, one individual was ill prior to going to the family reunion, and that was most likely the cause of the illness. So these are the types of outbreaks that we respond to and try and drill down and find out what is that root cause. In 2017, a local sandwich shop was linked to several illnesses. Overall, we conducted 52 phone and paper surveys. 65% of the respondents experienced GI symptoms after consumption of a sandwich at that establishment. No food or human samples yielded a causative agent. It was suspected to be norovirus, and it was based on the symptoms the individuals had and the time of onset of the symptoms after they ate the sandwich. And then in 2018, we had one case of Salmonella typhi, which is typhoid fever. It resulted in exclusions of several household contacts that worked in the food service industry. These household contacts worked in multiple food establishments, which happens a lot in food, but no additional cases were linked to the household or the community. So just some other statistics is 1 in 6 people will suffer from a foodborne illness in a year. These are common, they're costly, and they're preventable. The USDA estimates the cost for the US to be more than $15.6 billion. And each year the CDC reported that 48 million got sick, 128,000 were hospitalized, and 3,000 died. So some pretty big numbers there. So in looking at the other plan, in 2016, infectious disease was rated high, and just my suggestion is to keep it rated high, but based on what we've seen. And I'll take any questions.
Hi, my name's Tom Roth. Kind of a funny story how I got here.
Thank you very much.
2 days ago, Jason caught up with me at a mutual meeting we were having in Douglas County and said, hey, you gotta be there Friday. And I'm going, what's on Friday? As you know, I used to have Jason's job, retired last October. So he's kind of taken over for me, but I'm here to kind of present some historical data for the hazmat responses. Locally, here in Carson City, every day we have the fire department rolling on hazardous materials responses, but most of it's handled at an engine company level. So it's not declared a big hazmat event. The fire response takes care of it right then and there, and it's over and done with. The types of responses we would talk about that would be included in the plan would be major hazardous events, hazardous materials events, either having to do with our light industrial areas in the north and northeast or the southwest part of town, on our transportation corridors, which would be I-580 north-south and Highway 50 east-west. And those would be transportation incidents of all kinds. And then we don't have a railroad car threat here in Carson per se. The V&T railroad pretty much hauls people, not hazardous materials. Not to say that we couldn't have a small hazardous material event with, say, a locomotive or something like that, but minimal with rail. In Carson, since 2000, the last plan was built, 2016 to present, we had probably about 3 mentionable hazardous material incidents. A couple in the light industrial area. Most of our responses, the hazardous material team in Carson City is kind of the anchor for the Quad County hazardous materials team. So most of our responses from 2016 to present have been out of county. A couple at the lake, one out at Tesla, which is in Story County. Just kind of dotted around the Quad Counties, which leaves Carson City, when the team is gone, it leaves Carson City open to a hazmat event without a team. So there is that issue, but I think we have plenty of backup and mutual aid available to cover those respective responses. The Triad team in Reno Sparks, Truckee Meadows area would respond to back us up, and of course we would respond to back them up. So there's a lot of mutual aid that goes along with hazardous materials. There's really, as far as listing hazmat in the hierarchy of all of our hazards, hazardous materials are so, they just come whenever they come. We can't predict, we can't project. All we can do is educate and mitigate as they come up. We do have at the LEPC level, all of our Tier 2 hazardous materials industrial sites in town. Whoever handles hazardous materials turns in a list every year for our LEPC committee to review, and they're all considered the Tier 2 manufacturers or distributors of hazmat here in town. So we get a real good list. We know where our target hazards are here in Carson. The potential is there. It just is hard to say when it'll come and when it'll happen. So I can take questions if anybody has any questions for hazmat.
Are you including like rad material in hazmat?
Which material?
Radiological.
Yes. Yeah. Rad is in there. Chemical, biological, radiological, all of the WMD type of hazmat is included. One super resource that we do have here locally is that the 92nd CST Civil Support Team is actually stationed right here in Carson City over on a super secret site. I can't tell you where, but right in front of William Street. They are a state and federal response team that will respond at our request for assistance anytime we want. So a huge bonus for us here in Northern Nevada. Any other questions?
Whenever I get these in my hand, I want to do karaoke. Right there, not to you, Jason. Hi there, everyone. My name is Jerome Tushgrant. I'm the undersheriff here in Carson City. I'm going to be talking about the hazard mitigation plan specific to what we're calling man-made disasters. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. So in section 5 of the 2016 hazard mitigation plans, we came up with the title human threat, or what we're calling acts of violence. Now I'm going to compliment the people who wrote the report in 2016. They did some really good organization, some really good research, And that is the template of what I'm talking about here today. Next slide. So the Carson City Sheriff's Office, if you don't know, we have 101 sworn people, about 50 full-time equivalents when it comes to part-timers. We come into a whole bunch of different divisions within the organization, including administration, investigations, patrol, jail, communications, which you also call dispatch, and the civil division, which also includes records. For the sake of time and the audience we have today, we're not going to get further into there, but we'll start talking about the previously identified threats that the 2016 plan dictated. One of which is the civil disorder or riotous behavior. The next one is terrorism, and the third one is criminal acts involving past casualties. So I'm going to go through each one of those individually. So when it comes to civil disorder or riotous behavior, we have to distinguish between constitutionally protected First Amendment rights versus criminal behavior. And within the criminal behavior, it's been distinguished into three different types of categories. The first one is civil disobedience, and that's been defined as a refusal to obey civil laws in an effort to effect change in government policy or legislation. The second one is a civil disturbance, very similar, but using acts of violence for the same purpose. And the final one is riotous behavior. And a riot is two or more people doing an unlawful act of violence, even if it's for a lawful purpose, and doing that in a violent, tumultuous, or illegal manner. So the Carson City Sheriff's Department recognizes the difference and how to handle these, and that a First Amendment protected event is not a criminal event, and we do carry that under our particular policy number 468. So in 2020, the country as a whole saw a massive amount of protests, illegal activity involving political change, rallies, or whatever definition you want to have. This is a publicly available open source heat map showing all the events that were recorded only between May and August of 2020. And you're going to be able to see here in Nevada, we've had a few, including in the Carson City area, Washoe County, Elko, and down in Clark County, Las Vegas area. So statewide and regionally, we saw protests in Las Vegas in about late May to early June of 2020. That involved 155 people being arrested, and most tragically, a police officer was shot in the head. I can tell you he is still going through rehabilitation. He is alive, but I understand he's paralyzed and is going to be having a lifetime of difficulty going ahead. In Reno, also about that same time, they experienced what was declared as a riot, which caused significant damage to both the city hall and to the outside of the police department. In there, looting, violence, and arsons were reported. I understand that there were also assaults, including members of the press. We can't also forget nationally that we've had the situation of January 6, 2021, which has really kind of ended this season of protests in a very difficult manner for everyone involved. So from about April to November 2020 here, specifically in Carson City, we've had rallies or protests almost weekly, if not weekly, and sometimes multiple times a week. During that period, we saw numerous calls for service, some minor disturbances, traffic complaints, disruption to businesses. There was once a negligent discharge resulting in criminal charges, and then the traffic-related citations and arrests. Overall, we're very happy with the fact that it was minimal enforcement taken during this period. No damage or injuries were reported. And I say injuries, I think there was someone who was hit with some water, but nothing of a significant injury reported. So in my assessment, as we start working on this plan, I'm going to say that the likelihood of a significant civil disorder or riotous behavior is moderate to high. It kind of depends on the political landscape and things that are completely out of our control dictating the response from the general public. We also have to recognize that here in Carson City, being the state capital, we encourage people to protest, and we do have some areas out here that are very good for that, that they can get loud and boisterous, and that's the purpose for that particular place. We encourage that. If a riot is to occur in Carson City, there's going to be significant outcomes, whether it's going to be short-term or long-term, and we're going to be talking about those because all three of these topics today have the same significant outcome to the community. The next topic is terrorism. Now, terrorism is described or defined by the Department of Justice as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate, coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. That terrorism can be either domestic or foreign. So in 2020, 3 people were arrested in Las Vegas for a series of charges involving conspiracy, terrorism, firearms violations, explosive possession, and advocating to the government. It does happen in our state. The FBI has also stated nationally, and this is all open source information, that domestic violence extremism poses an elevated threat, and they are putting a lot of resources at the federal level to address this issue. If, being the state capital and being an area that could have symbolic effects to any type of an attack, we have several targets here. One is the critical infrastructure. That's going to be the water, sewer, telephone, internet, those types of things. Government buildings, obviously the Capitol, which has all 3 branches of government. We have City Hall, and we have quite the central hub of state offices here in Carson City. Military installations, I think Tom gave up the secret location of one of them. And then, of course, we do have the National Guard base out there on Fairview. But we also have other softer targets, such as law enforcement, such as hospitals or casinos. The likelihood of terrorism occurring here internationally is low. Domestic, it's higher, and that's something we're going to have to talk about as a committee. And if it does occur, it's going to have quite an impact on our community. Again, we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So let's talk about mass casualties. And I need to go through some definitions here real quick so as we talk about the terms that I'm going to be using. The term active shooter is defined as, excuse me for a second, I don't want to screw this one up. Okay, I don't have it in my notes, so I'm going to have to do it top of my head. It's the act of violence against a group of people, regardless of political notions, usually in a closed or public area. This is distinguished from a mass killing in the fact that a mass murder is, depending on what definition you're using, 3 or more people in a single incident or near single incident of time. We also talk about a mass shooting, which is when you use a gun to kill 3 or more, 4 or more, depending on the definition that you're using. And then we have the active shooter situation. Now, technically, no one has to be even hurt or killed for there to be an active shooter meeting that definition. It's the fact that they're trying to hurt or kill people. And you're going to notice by my Venn diagram that one of these definitions could be affecting the other ones. And of course, we can't forget about workplace violence. That is when we have situations where violence is occurring in the workplace. The reason why I include that in this definition is most workplace violence, well over a supermajority of them, are handled at a very local level, many times by the employer without even involving law enforcement. But some of the mass shootings, mass killings, and active shooters happen in workplaces and oftentimes involve people who are employed and have a motive for the same type of reason as a workplace violence situation. So I brought up some on the top here. You can see there's a couple of graphs. The The numbers aren't super important, although we're talking about humans and that is important, but I think what I need to stress to you is showing that it's an upward trend. This is going from 2020 to 2018. The FBI takes about 2 years to get their official reports done. They're just now working on 2019 data, and over here on the bottom, that would be your right, you can see the 2019 data, showing also the continuation of an upward trend, not only in incidents, but people killed and people wounded. Even from a distance, you can see in 2017, there's this very large spike. That was the incident at the Route 91 incident on October 1st, 2017 down in Las Vegas. We'll address that here in a second. I've also got the statistics for mass shootings, at least from one public source from 2016 to 2018. It is also consistent to what we're seeing is more incidents, more people getting killed, and more people being injured. There is a caveat to this discussion, and that's 2020. And COVID seemed to have shot down a lot of things, including things like mass murders and active shooters. In 2020, we only had 2 with 9 people being killed. Now, that's 9 human beings, so I can't minimize that. But from a statistical standpoint, it's something that we have to look at going, there's going to be a little asterisk next to 2020 for quite some time to explain these trends. Okay. So locally, regionally, and statewide, when we start talking about things matching the definitions of what we just discussed, I'm going to start back in 2011 with IHOP occurring on September 6th. 4 people were killed, 7 wounded. For those of you who lived in the area, this still is really part of our psyche and is still very fresh in our memories, even though it's been nearly 10 years. In October 21st, 2013, we had the Sparks Middle School event. 1 person was killed and 2 people were wounded, but that was probably our first taste of violence when it comes to school and the situation that occurred there. Just a couple months after that, and not too far away at the renowned medical campus, a person went in there, shot 2 people, and killed a doctor. Another tragic situation that involved a person's mental health, behavioral health. And then one of the largest one in the nation to date, and it happened down south from here, was the October 1st, 2017, where 60 were killed and 411 were wounded that particular day. So the chances of a mass casualty event, depending on how you define it, can range anywhere from medium to high. And if it does occur, again, it's going to have a profound impact on the community. So when we start talking about the impact, both short and long term, we can talk about the physical impact and the emotional or psychological impact, and that's going to be felt almost immediately. But let's talk about the things that's going to be happening to the community in the coming days, weeks, months, or even years. The other one is there's going to be disruption to business. People aren't going to be able to drive where they want to for a while. There's going to be significant costs to the investigation and to the prosecution of these types of situations. There's going to be a disruption to quality of life. That's not very tangible, but one of the things I know I'm very proud of doing is trying to not only keep people safe, but try and keep people feeling safe. It's going to be hurting the community's reputation, higher insurance rates, lower property value, higher prices, less taxes coming in because less people are spending or coming to town, and last but not least, and probably not inclusive, is a decrease in economic opportunity. So I've talked about the things in the current report, and I was asked if there was anything that for the man-made hazards I would want to see discussed for future plans for the hazard mitigation, and that's going to be cybercrime or cyberterrorism. By definition, it's a criminal act. Now, whether or not we as the Sheriff's Department can prosecute it or have the resources, or if the offenders even are jurisdiction, let's put that aside for the discussion. But it is a criminal act, so it would kind of fall under what we're talking about here in chapter or section 5. The motives can be political, revenge, extortion. It can be information gathering or for profit. Specific to hazards seen here in our community and particularly to the city government are things like ransomware or extortion. There's many incidents in the public domain about cities that have turned on their computers and a virus has done it, and you have to pay 5 or 6 Bitcoins to get that thing opened up. And that it can have a significant impact on the city, whether it's you're going to pay it or you're not. It's going to cost a lot of money to get this thing addressed. Second, take over facilities or utilities. That technology does exist, and I know that the government has published documents talking about how this type of thing is happening on a daily basis. People are trying to get into our grids or into city water systems, again, for whatever motive that we've talked about. Denial of service. Can you imagine if a denial of service attack occurs at dispatch and all of a sudden you can't call for an emergency, and only people who can save us is like James Underwood and his heroes over there at IT. And then, of course, sometimes people are using the internet just to create problems. And we are seeing that all three of these things that we're talking about overlap, just like the Venn diagram I've said, because although there might not be any issues in the community, someone getting on a keyboard in Ukraine can actually start causing some problems and having people march and protest when it wasn't naturally or organically going to happen. So in conclusion, this is my name, my phone number, and where I work. My boss is sitting there in the back if you'd like to tell him what a great job I do. If you don't, I wasn't here. And I am available for any questions or comments.
All right, so I'm James Underwood, Chief Information Officer for Parks and City, and I thank Jerome for the lead-in on kind of why I'm here. This is the first time IT actually participated in this process from an IT perspective. The reason I'm here is for awareness and to just give you a little bit of background of what cybersecurity, what does it mean? What does it mean to the city? What can happen if it goes wrong? Cyber attacks are happening every day, as you probably are aware. Is there anybody in the room, just show of hands in the room, that doesn't kind of have an understanding of what a cyber attack is? All right, nobody. So everybody's aware of it. Good. So when we talk about cybersecurity, there's kind of three main areas that we want to consider: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'm going to pick up my notes here real quick. So confidentiality is when you hear things about data breaches. The bad guys got your data, and now they're going to go open up accounts in your name and charge things to your credit, and that type of stuff. It's also what Jerome mentioned, where they're taking over systems. So they get into your system and they're now controlling your system. So that's confidentiality. Integrity is, when I log into my bank account, it tells me the right amount of money that I have. Right? You're getting back what you expect to out of the system. The data is correct, that type of thing. Obviously, availability was also mentioned by Jerome, and that's the denial of service. So if your system's not available to use, that's a bad thing. So I've got a couple of videos. Keita, do you have those ready? The links that I sent you? That I want to give some examples that recently happened. And one of them is related to confidentiality, and the other is related to availability. So let's do this. Let's do the second one first. So these are real short, about 2 minutes apiece, but you may not have seen them. You may have seen them. They illustrate some of the really important reasons why we want to do security, cybersecurity well.
Is it gonna echo in here if I turn on the laptop, Jordan?
It should be able to do that.
I think you should be fine, yeah.
that we will be close to 90% complete by the end of this week.
So actually I did it in reverse. This is a availability issue. So all of the services in Baltimore were down for a week, including 911 services, everything. They didn't fully recover really for several months. You can imagine the impact on the city. So, and let's go to the next one.
James, they actually paid 18 million.
That was the estimated costs.
So it's
Sorry, I can't skip the ad.
The FBI investigating after a hacker broke into the computer system in a water treatment facility in Florida, just miles from the Super Bowl, raising a powerful chemical to potentially dangerous levels. Victor Opindo is in Miami Beach with this story for us. Good morning, Victor.
Good morning, Robin. This happened in the town of Oldsmar, home to 15,000 people. While no water was actually contaminated, the systems definitely breached in an attempt to poison the supply. This morning, the Secret Service and FBI are investigating a dangerous cyber attack. A hacker attempted to poison the Florida City's water supply. Happened last Friday in Oldsmar, just miles from the Super Bowl stadium. The sheriff's office says that hacker used remote access to the town's water treatment plant computer system that controls chemicals and changed the level of sodium hydroxide, also known as lye, the main ingredient in liquid drain cleaner, from 100 parts per million to more than 11,000 per million.
We don't know right now whether the breach originated from within the United States or outside the country. We also do not know why the Oldsmar system was targeted.
Thankfully, a plant operator noticed someone on the system making a potentially harmful change in chemicals and removed the levels before any water was contaminated.
Fortunately, there are layers of protective systems and redundancies in place to make sure that it's not an instantaneous switch. You can't change the chemical mix of what's going into drinking water.
So there's two things I wanted to point out there. One is obviously that's a very severe potential hazard. Two is they have controls in place. So that's one of the reasons why IT needs to be involved in these things. That particular attack happened from a system that was misconfigured and available on the internet. There's various ways for attackers to get in. So that's kind of the next thing I wanted to get to is how did they get in? One thing is misconfigured technology. Another thing would be technology with flaws. Sometimes there are flaws in the system that allow internet access because of that flaw if that system has connectivity to the internet. An example of that recently is anybody familiar with Microsoft Outlook?
Yes.
So Microsoft Outlook connects to a thing called Exchange Server, and that is the back-end storage of Outlook. That particular system had a flaw that any cyber attacker could connect to the system, install software on that system, and get inside the company or the city network, anywhere it was running. It was a very, very bad problem. That particular vulnerability, the city found out about it and corrected it within 10 hours. So we've got to be on our toes for things like that. Another example of, in 2020, anybody hear about SolarWinds? Show of hands. Yeah. So that software is pervasive in a lot of government and enterprises, commercial enterprises, to monitor switches and routers, any kind of equipment on the network. So that's an IT type software that had a flaw in it that enabled the attackers to get into the system. In 2020, fortunately the city doesn't run SolarWinds. We took that out about 2.5 years ago. In 2020, Tyler Technologies had a major breach in their system on their support side. So someone was able to get into Tyler Technologies support. So this is when we're contacting Tyler Technologies to get help with the system. Sometimes they will log into the system, and some of the customers, they have passwords for the customer systems to do the support. The attackers got those passwords. So the attackers would be able to get into the customer systems. And one that affected us specifically here in Carson City that we had a publication, a press release about is Click2Gov. There's a flaw in the Click2Gov payment processing software, and the attackers were able to get some information on some of the Carson City citizens, unfortunately. So these are all kind of examples of things that can happen, we need to be careful about, and kind of why I'm here today, to raise the awareness. What I've seen in the presentation so far, I see some really great policies and procedures on things like flood control, fire control, brush reduction or fuel reduction, building codes, things like that. Those are all great things and directly applicable to cybersecurity, where we also need to have the same level of maturity of processes. And I'll give you another example. We had, no, this is before I got to the city, but I was talking to one of my guys, and there was a firewall that was plugged in on part of the city network that brought part of the city network down. When you've got things being plugged into your network that IT is not aware of, that can cause cybersecurity incidents. So, one of the other things I wanted to talk about is to kind of fill you in on how another way that attackers can get into systems. So, one of the most common ways that they can gain access is through human interaction. So it's called social engineering, phishing. So send you an email. If you click on the link, you go into their website. It looks like a legitimate website. You enter your password, your user ID. Now they have your password and user ID. So awareness in the city of those types of things is very important. This year we started, with the help of the HR department, annual required cybersecurity training. So a couple of years back, we established cybersecurity training, and we were getting maybe 60% compliance citywide. So we worked with HR to make that a requirement for submitting the annual performance reviews, along with the harassment prevention training. So, when you raise awareness, I think everybody starts thinking more about, why this can happen and how this can happen. Has anybody ever wondered why IT has pulled back on administrative access on computers? You used to be able to install software on your own. Anybody? Hands? Good crowd, good crowd. So, IT has introduced these controls over time more and more, and sometimes we get a little bit of pushback because we might have a power user that has been able to update their software on their own in the past, and now they can't, and they have a prompt that says, hey, this needs administrator access, and I have to contact IT. That's a pain for them, right? The reason we do that is that if the user has administrator access, then they can get credentials for anybody that's logged on to that PC for the last 10 times that person's logged on. So when you take your laptop out in the field and you don't have connectivity to the network, think about how you log in. You use your regular password, right? That means that the password is cached on the laptop. I'm not talking about cash that you spend, cash as in cash of whatever, supplies. Same type of idea. So that cache password is not stored in a plain text so that it can be seen, but it is stored in what's called a hash. So a attacker can download those hashes, run it through a powerful computer, and crack it to get the actual password. Or they can use the hash directly, because that hash can be used to authenticate, meaning prove who you are, that's actually the other guy, to the server. So today, I help you with my administrator password in IT. I log onto your computer, remote software, you guys are all familiar with that. That computer now has my hash on it. If you have administrator access and you've gotten phished and that attacker gets access to your computer, guess what? Also has access to my hash and my administrator credentials. So those are the reasons why we put controls in place like that to help. So we're kind of, we've made a lot of improvements in the past few years, but being here today, really with the parallels, I'm kind of excited about, making that more mature for us as a city. See if there's anything else that I missed. Some of the things that we're doing to help with this is we're working with the audit committee. They did a vulnerability assessment last year for us. We're working through the things that they found and some of the things that they recommended. We're also going to do a follow-up, planning to do a follow-up in August, so another and regular vulnerability assessments. And what that means, what does that mean, a vulnerability assessment? They scan all of our systems, internal, external, different situations, and tell us what an attacker would see, what a skilled hacker would see in terms of critical, high, medium, or low vulnerabilities. And I talked about the annual cybersecurity training. Think that covers kind of what I wanted to address. Just wanted to kind of get us involved in this process and help raise of awareness, as I had mentioned. So, any questions? All right, that's all I got.
So I've been in touch with NV Energy. NV Energy has a emergency manager. I wasn't aware of that, but I am now. And they reached out to me because they're planning for what they're calling PSOMs, Public Safety Outage Management. So they're going to shut our power off, brownouts, and then basically on red flag days. So red flag days, expecting extreme fire behavior. They're going to start shutting those off. So they haven't clearly said where those areas are and what those areas are. They have some maps. They're working on a bunch of different stuff. Carson City's not the biggest area. It's going to be more like coming down Spooner, Lake Tahoe, and the Basin on the Nevada side. Those are going to be their primary ones. There's a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I can't remember all that, but so that is an issue that we're going to address. So we're going to plan for, prepare for, and something that we're going to add. So we're in touch with the right people on that. Cascading emergencies. Cascading emergencies is the other secondary thing, which is basically a wind event that knocks out power. And then, so the power itself isn't a natural disaster, but the wind event or the fire or whatever is a cascading emergency that we're going to deal with on the plan. So we do have some people here that have not spoken. Does anybody have anything that they want to add at this point? Okay.
Can we ask questions now?
I don't know if I know the answers, but yeah.
So certainly as a local entity, we want to make sure that the tail isn't wagging the dog and we're leading that, right? This is Carson City's hazard mitigation plan. I'm just curious, as the contractors, if there's going to be any conversation to take a look at the state's priorities related to hazard mitigation and where that alignment is, and then to also look at where the federal hazard mitigation planning grant priorities are, because that's also an asset for us to be able to receive funding, where we as a city have to do 25% of the match, but then the other 75% comes from the feds. And that cybersecurity piece is a huge one, and all of those priorities have been set on a federal level, and I think that even though we identify what our hazard mitigations are, I think that we also need to take into account what some of the priorities are nationwide and also statewide, because that's where we're gonna have access to some of the funding to assist us with some of our efforts with what we're doing. And so I would just encourage that that conversation happen with the Division of Emergency Management at the state level, and to also take a look at that HMPG funding for some of that piece as well. We're obviously not a UASI, so we don't have like all of that funding, but that HMPG money, even at the end when it's not used by the jurisdictions or the entities that received it, sometimes that money comes available like in January that has to be spent by the end of June, and that's a pot of money that if we know we have projects and we might have a project that's $50,000, it's still $50,000. We have to match 25% of that money, but it's still an asset, still an opportunity for us as a jurisdiction to maximize what's available to us.
I'll just tag on to what Jeannie said. To be sure to include loss reduction in each of your hazard mitigation items as well. If you're going to go for accreditation for your emergency management program, loss reduction is huge. So make sure to include that as well.
Loss reduction, you mean how the mitigation is reducing the losses for the city? Is that, okay, yes. That could be a mitigation action. Included in your activities, business one practice, absolutely. And to talk about how we're addressing the state level mitigation actions or their priorities, we are looking at the state plan to make sure that those priorities, as a matter of fact, it's part of our hazard identification and ranking process. As far as the HMPG, that is a different program, and I understand there are priorities for that. We cannot consider those man-made hazards at a depth that it would take to link our priorities, the Carson City priorities for man-made hazards, to the state, because the FEMA funding for hazard mitigation does not include man-made hazards. So we are including any acts of violence or any of these hazards that were discussed today in the plan, because that's what the committee wants to include. However, hazard mitigation grant funds do not cover man-made hazards.
There are other funds like Homeland Security funds that will cover those, but they're based off of the priorities set forth by the state.
And so having them tied into our hazard mitigation plan becomes important for us, because
gotcha. Okay, do you guys
that's
have
why that
priority?
connection. That's why that connection is there. And so, and the HMPG, it does allow for there to be cybersecurity stuff that's tied to everything from our terrorism, like the terrorism, was it NTAC, and those kinds of things. And so it does allow for that connection. It doesn't necessarily have to be that that's where the application is tied to, if it's tied to something related to Homeland Security as well. You just need to make sure that you have it in your hazard mitigation plan, that it is a priority. Otherwise, you have nothing to stand on when you're going for those funds.
For the HMGP?
For Homeland Security or for
That's
like.
a different grant. Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. So do you ladies have the information about the priorities for the state? Can we count on you to give us those priorities?
Kelly Anderson and Dave Fogerson. So Dave Fogerson is the Chief of Division of Emergency Management, and Kelly Anderson is the primary grants oversight for that. And then also Janelle Woodward up at DEM. Those are going to be your 3 points of contact.
They're in our Zoom grants.
You can help with that. Okay. That's what your task. Your task.
One comment on that is, so the state every other year does their own DIRA threat assessment, and we're involved at a county level. Every county in the state's involved in that threat assessment for the state. So it's already been done. The state has it on file. Ours can, those threat assessments that the state puts out, we can mirror that depending on the threat level we assign to it. So, but but there's already data out there.
She has.
Yeah.
I do have the fire.
Oh, perfect.
I just wanted I don't know what the state priorities are for the landing hazards.
They set that, and that's new, every time we could do our Zoom grant stuff, that's all popped up on there, right? That's.
So I'll rely on Jason to give me his priorities.
Yeah, the chief Dana sits on the Nevada Resiliency Commission, so he has access to that information.
He's a big guy. That's a big commission. Okay, perfect. So we'll look at those as well. Okay. So the exercise for today was to look at the hazards that we talked about, decide whether we want to include them, we want to add, delete, what do we want to do with those hazards, and then rank them. It's really, really late now. So based on the information that we received today, you've got a listing of hazards from the previous year. And I'm gonna let Kate walk you through this. How many of you are okay with staying to do this? It's a little bit late again, so if you're okay with staying, please stay. But if not, Kate is going to explain to you how to go ahead and rank, and you will expect your ranking back by the end of the day on Monday. Okay?
So I'm just going to walk through real quickly what we need from you. Do you need me to use this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. First, I just want to say I'm so impressed with all the presentations today, all the expertise that came in remotely and that we have in the room. Not only is there expertise, it's well delivered, and so thank you to all our presenters. I learned a lot and I appreciate that. So the ranking section, there's a paper in the back of your packet that does show the Carson City rankings from 2010 and 2016. I found it just a little bit interesting how the rankings moved around in that period. And I think it's something to think about whether, for example, people are tuning into climate change and some of its impacts, perhaps. And on the next page are the state rankings for the last two reviews. They have a little different format, but extreme heat moved over from low risk to high risk from one period to the next. So there's just different things going on that I think are worth considering. And then, very importantly, we have our hazard prioritization criteria. And this is a key for you to use to give each hazard a value based on these categories. And it's very clearly defined for you how to rank the categories. Do you have a question? No. We added one called warning time. Yeah. And we also have duration of loss and frequency in the future, as well as probability and magnitude. To some extent, the presenters talked about their view of some of those categories. It's also okay for you to decide what's your view. So I just wanted to emphasize that you can put in what you think for those things. We will be circulating this also to others. So I also wanted to show you the hazard ranking tool. This is the sheet where you enter your scores in each category for each hazard. The ones that are in red have some controversy around them, so to speak. What should we call acts of violence? There's some question about whether we have the right name. So there were some suggestions today, and there's different categories. And if anyone in the room has something on the tip of their tongue, please tell us now. But also you can use this to give us input on what that should be. Climate change is added because it is a FEMA requirement that it be addressed. And so it will be discussed, but in a sense, in relation to, it will have a section and you might talk about the impacts of climate change on specific hazards as well. So, and storms can be all kinds of storms, so that's why that is in red. Okay, so as you go through this, we just appreciate it if you would take some time and do that and scan it back to us by Monday at 5, if that's doable.
Yes. Yes. So I'm, for those of you who don't know me, Kelly Epperberg from Washoe County. I'm the emergency manager up there. And we also have 13 hazards identified in our plan. Please by no means take what I'm about to say, I mean telling you what to do with this. I just was cross-referencing, going through this, comparing it to our hazards as well, and thought I would share the differences for you to decide, you know, whatever you're gonna do. The main difference I saw was that we have a transportation category to include air incidents and rail incidents as well, because they do occur as an track incident. Obviously we have air races, but things you have in your report as well. Might want to consider transportation. Sorry, thank you. And then if you're bent on that lucky 13, we combined avalanche and landslide because it's similar type of incident. So just a thought, not a sermon, but I thought I'd share it with you for your consideration. Oh, sorry. And then we did have criminal acts and terrorism, because you asked. That's what we labeled it.
Where did you put cybercraft in the criminal act?
Aha. So we said, we'll talk about it in 2025.
I second that. That's why I rushed to get here, because I didn't want to wait 5 years.
Yeah. I for sure started that when you started talking.
And just to address the fact that we need to look at those priorities for the state for the man-made hazards, I've rushed Jason to get those priorities to me Monday morning. So we'll distribute those out Monday morning, so you can take a look at those priorities and then make an informed decision on your ranking. Yes?
So the one thing about the state though is that the state stayed with natural disasters when they did their hazard mitigation plan, because that's where that FEMA piece is. But what I'm saying is that when we go to the funding streams and we look at what the priorities are in the funding streams, that's where some of those other man-made disasters come in, and that's why I'm saying we shouldn't necessarily ignore them in our hazard mitigation plan, because there is a funding stream attached to it. Just because FEMA, which deals in natural disasters, FEMA doesn't come out when you have a cybersecurity attack. Like, that's not their agency responsibility. So when you're looking at a plan that's related to FEMA, it's going to be strictly natural disasters. But I think we have to be forward-leaning into what we want to do. If we're trying to play catch-up, we're always behind. If we're leaning forward, then we're going to prepare our city to be ready for what's going to happen, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Thank you for your explanation. I think I was the one who misunderstood your questions. So absolutely, this is again a Carson City plan, and if Carson City wants to include man-made hazards, absolutely, it's not an issue.
So when you get those priorities from Jason next week, on Monday morning from the state, they're gonna be all natural hazards.
And they're already included in your packets, so I see what you're saying. Okay, my misunderstanding. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
So you've got all the information you need, sounds like. Let's talk about what Kelly said regarding adding transportation. Is that something you'd like to include as a community?
No.
No.
It's a good idea for Washington County.
Okay. Okay.
They have.
Makes sense for their transportation, what they have going through their community.
Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about transportation. The other question is for the acts of violence. Do you want to include acts of violence? Excuse me. It does not include cybersecurity. Would you like to do cybersecurity separate as its own hazard?
Yes.
Okay. So would you just write it in your little sheet as another hazard?
And you want to phrase it cyber crimes instead of cyber security?
That is a Jenny Sunderland question.
I would say probably the best term would be cyber attacks.
Cyber attack?
Whiteout. Yeah, just cross it out.
I need to cut the meeting off. The video is running out of power, so if you want to go ahead. There's no public comment. So you might want to take that in the next. Is there any other public
comment at this time. We're gonna cut off the video. Any other public comment? No public comment. Thank you.
So if you're able to stay and do this, great. If not, good. I'll give you guys my email it to me and I'll get it to them. But we want to make sure we get this. I know it's late. Thank you very much.